Alrighty. Volume. We're about there. This should do it. So, hello everyone. How are we doing today? It's time to get started for another Shae's story show.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Today we're going to be reading Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's, rest in peace, story Good Omens. It's a comedic take on the end times, and from the perspective of an angel and a demon who decide that they like Earth the way it is and they don't want to see it end. Also, the inspiration for one of the OCs that I use in Forest for the Trees. Aptly named, using the same name. Probably not completely the same mannerisms, but fairly close.
When you take inspiration from something, you kind of add your own twist to it, so it's not always going to be the same.
Yeah, exactly. And so I figure there's no real things to talk about tonight, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. We're just gonna do, we're gonna just do this, and you're gonna have to bear with me as best I can. I haven't done an out loud reading in quite a while, outside of DMing, of course, but
it will improve your lungs.
Yeah, it will improve your lungs. All right, so let's get started. In the beginning. It was a nice day. All the days had been nice. There had been rather more than 7 of them so far, and rain hadn't been invented yet. But clouds massing east of Eden suggested that the first thunderstorm was on its way, and it was going to be a big one. The angel of the eastern gate put his wings over his head to shield himself from the first drops. "I'm sorry," he said politely. "What was it you were saying?" "I said that one went down like a lead balloon," said the serpent. "Oh yes," said the angel, whose name was Aziraphale. I just call him Az because, wow, Aziraphale is a mouthful. "I think it was a bit of an overreaction, to be honest," said the serpent. "I mean, first offense and everything. I can't see what's so bad about knowing the difference between good and evil anyway." "It must be bad," reasoned Az, in the slightly concerned tones of one who can't see it either and is worrying about it. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have been involved." "I just said, get up there and make some trouble," said the serpent, whose name was Crawley. Although he was thinking of changing it now, Crawley, he decided, was not him. "Yes, but you're a demon. I'm not sure if it's actually possible for you to do good," said Aziraphale. "It's down to your basic, nature. Nothing personal, you understand." "You've got to admit, it's a bit of a pantomime, though," said Crawley. "I mean, pointing out the tree and saying, 'Don't touch,' in big letters. Not very subtle, is it? I mean, why not put it on top of a high mountain, or a long way off? Makes you wonder what he's really planning." "That's not to speculate, really," said Az. You can't second guess ineffability, I've always say. There's right and there's wrong. If you do wrong when you're told to do right, you deserve to be punished. Er. They sat in embarrassed silence, watching the raindrops bruise the first flowers. Eventually, Crawley said, "Didn't you have a flaming sword?" Er, said the angel. A guilty expression passed across his face, and then came back, encamped there. "You did, didn't you?" said Crawley. "It flamed like anything." Well, it looked very impressive, I thought. Yes, but, well, you lost it, haven't you? Oh, no. No, not exactly lost. More. Well. Aziraphale looked wretched. "If you must know," he said, a trifle testily, "I gave it away." Raleigh stared up at him. "Well, I had to," said the angel, rubbing his hands distractedly. "They looked so cold, poor things. And she's expecting already. And what with the vicious animals out there and the storm coming, I thought, well, where's the harm? So I just said, look, if you come back, there's going to be an almighty row. But you might be needing this sword. So here it is. Don't bother to thank me. Just do everyone a big favor, and don't let the sun go down on you here." He gave Crawley a worried grin. "That was the best course, wasn't it?" "I'm not sure it's exactly possible for you to do evil," said Crawley sarcastically. Aziraphale didn't notice the tone. "Oh, I do hope so," he said. "I really do hope so. It's been worrying me all afternoon." They watched the rain for a while. "Funny thing is," said Crawley, "I keep wondering whether the apple wasn't the right thing to do as well. A demon can get into real trouble doing the right thing." He nudged the angel. "Funny if we both got it wrong, eh? Funny if I did the good thing and you did the bad one, eh?" "Not really," said Aziraphale. Raleigh looked at the rain. "No," he said, sobering up. "I suppose not." Slate-black curtains tumbled over Eden. Thunder growled among the hills. The animals, freshly named, cowered from the storm. Far away, in the dripping woods, something bright and fiery flickered among the trees. It was going to be a dark and stormy night. So that's the first opening there.
So he gave him a flaming sword.
Uh-huh. The angel that guards the gates to Eden gave Adam and Eve his flaming sword so that they could be safe when they left.
Okay, just checking.
Yep. Good Omens. A narrative of certain events occurring in the last 11 years of human history, in strict accordance as shall be shewn with the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, compiled and edited with footnotes of an educational nature and precepts for the wise by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Dramatis Personae, supernatural beings. God, God. Metatron, the voice of God. Aziraphale, an angel and part-time rare book dealer. Satan, a fallen angel, the adversary. Beelzebub, a likewise fallen angel and prince of hell. Aster, a fallen angel and duke of hell. Oh, I don't think I'll read the whole casting because it'll probably give away quite a bit.
Haster.
Haster, Ligger.
That one doesn't sound familiar.
Haster is more commonly recognized as a H.P. Lovecraft. Or sorry, it's not a Lovecraftian. It's not one of HP's creations. Haster, the King in Yellow, is an elder god that was created in the Lovecraftian world. So it's interesting that they use him. I'll have to see if he actually has biblical connections, but basically, Haster acts as like a prophet that draws mortals away. Next chapter. 11 years ago. Current theories on the creation of the universe state that, if it was created at all and didn't just start, as it were, unofficially, it came into being between 10 and 20 million years ago. By the same token, the Earth itself is generally supposed to be about 4,500 million years old. These dates are incorrect. Medieval Jewish scholars put the date of the creation at 3760 BC. Greek Orthodox theologians put creation as far back as 5508 BC. These suggestions are also incorrect. Archbishop James Ussher, 1580 to 1656, published Annals Veteris et Novi Testamenti in 1654, which suggested that the heavens and the earth were created in 4004 BC. One of his aides took the calculation further and was able to announce triumphantly that the earth was created on Sunday, the 21st of October, 4004 BC, at exactly 9 a.m., because God liked to get work done early in the morning while he was still feeling fresh. This, too, was incorrect. By almost a quarter of an hour. The whole business with the fossilized dinosaur skeletons was a joke the paleontologists haven't seen yet. This proves two things. Firstly, that God moves in extremely mysterious, not to say circuitous ways. God does not play dice with the universe. He plays an inevitable game of his own devising, which might be compared from the perspective of any of the other players, and there's an asterisk, i.e. everybody, to being involved in an obscure and complex version of poker in a pitch-dark room with blank cards for infinite stakes with a dealer who won't tell you the rules and who smiles all the time. Secondly, the Earth's a Libra. The astrological prediction for Libra in the Your Stars Today column of the Hadfield Advisor on the day of this history on the day this history begins read as follows. Libra, September 24 to October 23rd. You may be feeling run down and always in the same old daily round. Home and family matters are highlighted and are hanging fire. Avoid unnecessary risks. A friend is important to you. Shelve major decisions until the way ahead seems clear. You may be vulnerable to a stomach upset today, so avoid salads. Help could come from an unexpected quarter. This was perfectly correct on every count except for the bit about the salads. It wasn't a dark and stormy night. It should have been, but that's the weather for you. For every mad scientist who's had a convenient thunderstorm just on the night of his great work is finished and lying on the slab, there have been dozens who've sat around aimlessly under the peaceful stars while Igor clocks it overtime. But don't let the fog, with rain later, temperatures dropping to around 45 degrees, give anyone a false sense of security. Just because it's a mild night doesn't mean that dark forces aren't abroad. They're abroad all the time. They're everywhere. They always are. That's the whole point. Two of them lurked in the ruined graveyard, two shadowy figures, one hunched and squat, the other lean and menacing, both of them Olympic-grade lurkers. If Bruce Springsteen had ever recorded Born to Lurk, these two would have been on the album cover. They had been lurking in the fog for about an hour now, and they had been pacing themselves and could lurk for the rest of the night if necessary, with still enough sullen menace for a final burst of lurking around dawn. Finally, after another 20 minutes, one of them said, "Bugger this for a lock. He should have been here hours ago." The speaker's name was Haster. He was a Duke of Hell. Many phenomena, wars, plague, sudden audits, have been advanced as evidence for the hidden hand of Satan in the affairs of man, but whenever students of demonology get together, the M25 London orbital motorway is generally agreed to be among the top contenders for Exhibit A. That's British humor, I'm assuming. Where they go wrong, of course, is in assuming that the wretched road is evil simply because of the incredible carnage and frustration it endangers every day. In fact, very few people on the face of the planet know that the very shape of the M25 forms the sigil Odegra, in the language of the black priesthood of ancient Mu, and means "Hail the great beast, devourer of worlds." The thousands of motorists who daily fume their way around its serpentine lengths have the same effect as water on a prayer wheel, grinding out an endless fog of low-grade evil to pollute the metaphysical atmosphere for scores of miles around. It was one of Crowley's better achievements. It had taken years to achieve, and it had involved 3 computer hacks, 2 break-ins, 1 minor bribery, and 1 wet night when all else had failed. 2 hours in a squelchy field, shifting the marker pegs a few, but occultly incredibly significant meters. Frost is hosting. Okay. When Crowley had watched the first 30-mile-long tail-backed, he'd expected the lovely, warm feeling of a bad job well done. It had earned him a commendation. Crowley was currently doing 110 miles per hour somewhere east of Slough. Nothing about him looked particularly demonic, at least by classical standards. No horns, no wings. Admittedly, he was listening to a Best of Queen tape, but no conclusion should be drawn from this because all tapes left in the car for more than about a fortnight metamorph into Best of Queen's albums. No particularly demonic thoughts were going through his head. In fact, he was currently wondering vaguely who Moe and Shandon were. Crowley had dark hair and good cheekbones. He was wearing snakeskin shoes, or at least presumably he was wearing shoes. He could do really weird things with his tongue, and whenever he forgot himself, he had a tendency to hiss. He also didn't blink much. The car he was driving was a 1926 black Bentley, one owner from new, and that owner had been Crowley. He'd looked after it. The reason he was late was that he was enjoying the 20th century immensely. It was much better than the 17th century, and a lot better than the 14th. One of the nice things about time, Crowley always said, was that it was steadily taking him further away from the 14th century. The most bloody, boring 100 years on God's, excuse his French, earth. The 20th century was anything but boring. In fact, a flashing blue light in his rearview mirror had been telling Crowley for the last 50 seconds that he was being followed by two men who would like to make it even more interesting for him. He glanced, he glanced at his watch, which was designed for the kind of rich, deep sea diver who likes to know what time it is in 21 world capitals while he was down there. There's another asterisk. It was custom made for Crowley. Getting just one ship custom made is incredibly expensive, but he could afford it. This watch gave him time in 20 world capitals and in a capital on another or in another place. Another place is both capitalized in the A and the P, where it is always one time, and that was too late. The Bentley. Oh,
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just musing. Another place, another time.
Mm-hmm. And the time is too late. Dun dun
Yeah.
dun. The Bentley thundered up the exit ramp and took the corner on two wheels and plunged down a leafy road. The blue light followed. Crowley sighed, took one hand from the wheel, and half turning, made a complicated gesture over his shoulder. The flashing light dimmed into the distance as the police car rolled to a halt, much to the amazement of its occupants. But it would be nothing to the amazement they'd experienced when they opened the hood and found out what the engine had turned into. In the graveyard, Hastur, the tall demon, passed a dog end, British idiom, I guess, back to Ligger, the shorter one, and the more accomplished lurker. "I can see a light," he said. "Here he comes now. The flash bastard." "What's that he's driving?" said Liger. "It's a car. A horseless carriage," explained Hastur. "I expect he didn't have them last time you was here. Not for what you might call general use." "They had a man at the front with a red flag," said Liger. They've come on a bit since then, I reckon." I have to really struggle to remember these voices.
I usually had issues when I would go between pages and not know who was talking
Yeah.
before it told me.
I stumbled on that one briefly, too. In the Eden scene. "What's this Crowley like?" said Liger. Master spat. "He's been up here too long," he said. "Right from the start. Gone native, if you ask me. Drives a car with a telephone in it." That tells you how old this is, hon.
Huh.
Telephone built into it. This book is like 20, 30 years old. Anyways. Liger pondered this. Like most demons, he had a very limited grasp of technology. And so he was just about to say something like, "I bet it needs a lot of wire," when the Bentley rolled to a halt at the cemetery gate. "And he wears sunglasses," sneered Hastur, "even when he don't need to." He raised his voice. "All hail Satan," he said. "All hail Satan," Liger echoed. "Aye," said Crowley, giving them a little wave. "Sorry I'm late, but you know how it is on the A40 at Benham, and then I tried to cut up towards Charlie Wood, and then—" "Now, we aren't all here," said Hastur meaningfully. "We must recount the deeds of the day." "Yes, deeds," said Crowley, with a slightly guilty look of one who is attending church for the first time in years and had forgotten which bits you stand up for. Hastur cleared his throat. I have tempted a priest, he said, and he walked down the street and saw a pretty girl in the sun. I put doubt into his mind. He would have been a saint, but within a decade we shall have him. Nice one, said Crowley helpfully. I have corrupted a politician, said Leaguer. I let him think a tiny rod would not hurt. Within a year, we shall have him. They both looked expectantly at Crowley, who gave them a big smile. You'll like this, he said. His smile became even wider and more conspiratorial. I tied up every portable telephone system in central London for 45 minutes at lunchtime, he said. There was silence, except for the distant swishing of cars. Yes, said Hastur. And then what? Look, it wasn't easy, said Crowley. That's all, said Leaguer. Look, people... And exactly what has that done to secure souls for our master? Said Hastur. Crowley pulled himself together. What could he tell them? That 20,000 people got bloody furious? That you could hear the arteries clanging shut all across the city? And that then they went back and took it out on their secretaries or traffic wardens or whatever, and they took it out on other people? All kinds of vindictive little ways which, and here was the good bit, they thought up themselves. For the rest of the day, the pass-along effects were incalculable. Thousands and thousands of souls all got a faint patina of tarnish, and you hardly had to lift a finger. But you couldn't tell that to demons like Hastur and Leaguer, 14th century minds, and the lot of them. Spending years picking away at one soul, admittedly, it was craftsmanship, but you had to think differently these days. Not big, but wide. With 5 billion people in the world, you couldn't pick the buggers off one by one anymore. You had to spread your effort. But demons like Leaguer and Hastur wouldn't understand. They'd never have thought up Welsh language television, for example, or value-added tax, or Manchester. He'd been particularly pleased with Manchester. The powers that be seemed to be satisfied, he said. Times are changing. So what's up? Hastur reached down behind a tombstone. This is, he said. Crowley stared at the basket. Oh, he said. No. Yes, said Hastur, grinning. Already? Yes. And, it's up to me to... Yes. Hastur was enjoying this. Why me? Said Crowley desperately. You know me. Hastur, this isn't, my scene. Oh, it is, said Hastur. Your scene, your starring role. Take it. Times are changing. Yeah, said Leaguer, grinning. They're coming to an end for a start. Why me? You're obviously highly favored, said Hastur maliciously. I imagine Leaguer here would give his right arm for a chance like this. That's right, said Leaguer. Someone's right arm, anyways, he thought. There were plenty of right arms around, no sense in wasting a good one. Hastur produced a clipboard from the grubby recesses of his Mac. Sign here, he said, leaving a terrible pause between the words. Crowley fumbled vaguely in the inside pocket and produced a pen. It was sleek and matte black. It looked as though it could exceed the speed limit. It's a nice pen, said Leaguer. It can write underwater. Crowley muttered. Whatever will they think of next, mused Leaguer. Whatever it is, they'd better think of it quickly, said Haster. No, not A.J. Crowley. Your real name. Crowley nodded mournfully and drew a complex, squiggly sigil on the paper. It glowed redly in the gloom, just for a moment, and then faded. What am I supposed to do with it? He said. You will receive instructions, Aster scowled. Why so worried, Crowley? The moment we have been working for all these centuries is at hand. Yeah, right, said Crowley. He did not look, now, like the lithe figure that had sprung so lithely from the Bentley a few moments ago. He had a haunted expression. Our moment of triumph awaits. Eternal. Yeah, said Crowley. And you will be a tool of that glorious destiny. Tool? Yeah, muttered Crowley. He picked up the basket as if it might explode, which, in a matter of speaking, it would shortly do. Okay, he said. I'll, be off then, shall I? Get it over with. Not that I want to get it over with, he added hurriedly, aware of the things that could happen if Haster turned in an unfavorable report. But you know me, keen. The senior demons did not speak. So I'll be popping along, Crowley babbled. See you, great, fine, ciao. As the Bentley skidded off into the darkness, Leaguer said, What does that mean? It's Italian, said Haster. I think it means food. Funny thing. Funny thing to say, then. Leaguer stared at the retreating taillights. You trust him? He said. No, said Haster. Right, said Leaguer. It'd be a funny old world, he reflected, if demons went around trusting one another. Small sip. Thoughts?
Not anything in particular. I guess I was just thinking, because I was equating Crowley with Mephistopheles.
Crowley, somewhere west of Amersham, hurtled through the night, snatched a tape at random, and tried to wrestle it out of its brittle plastic box while staying on the road. The glare of a headlight proclaimed it to be Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Soothing music. That's what he needed. He rammed it into the La Funk tape recorder? I don't know what that word means. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit! Why now? Why me? He muttered, as the familiar strains of Queen washed over him. And suddenly, Freddie Mercury was speaking to him. Because you've earned it, Crowley. Crowley blessed under his breath. Using electronics as a means of communication had been his idea, and Below had, for once, taken it up, and as usual, got it dead wrong. He'd hoped they could be persuaded to subscribe to Cellnet, but instead they just cut in to whatever happened to be that he was listening to at the time and twisted it up. Crowley gulped. Thank you so much, Lord, he said. We have great faith in you, Crowley. Thank you, Lord. This is important, Crowley. Yes, I know, I know. This is the big one, Crowley. Leave it to me, Lord. This is what we are doing, Crowley. And if it goes wrong, then those involved will suffer greatly. Even you, Crowley. Especially you. Understood, Lord. Here are your instructions, Crowley. And suddenly he knew. He hated that. They could just as easily have told him. They didn't suddenly have to drop chilly knowledge straight into his brain. He had to drive to a certain hospital. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Lord. No problem. Good. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Crowley thumped the wheel. Everything had been going so well. He'd had it really under his thumb for these few centuries. That's how it goes. You think you're on top of the world, and suddenly they spring Armageddon on you. The Great War, the last battle, heaven versus hell. 3 rounds, 1 fall, no submission. And that'd be that. No more world. That's what the end of the world meant. No more world. Just endless heaven, or, depending on who won, endless hell. Crowley didn't know which was worse. Well, hell was worse, of course, by definition. But Crowley remembered what heaven was like, and it had quite a few things in common with hell. You couldn't get a decent drink in either of them, for a start, and the boredom you got in heaven was almost as bad as the excitement you got in hell. But there was no getting out of it. You couldn't be a demon and have free will. I will not let you go, let him go. And at least, it wouldn't be this year. He'd have time to do things. Unload long-term stocks for a start. He wondered what would happen if he just stopped the car here, on this dark and damp empty road, and took the basket and swung it around and around, and let it go, and... something dreadful. That's what. He'd been an angel once. He hadn't meant to fall. He'd just hung around with the wrong people. The Bentley plunged on through the darkness, its fuel gauge pointing to 0. It had pointed to 0 for more than 60 years now. It wasn't all bad, being a demon. You didn't have to buy petrol, for one thing. The only time Crowley had bought petrol was once in 1967, to get the free James Bond bullet hole in the windscreen transfers, which he rather fancied at the time. On the back seat, the thing in the basket began to cry, the air raid siren wail of a newly born, high, wordless, and old.
So was he talking to
Satan.
Gotcha.
He was talking to Satan through Freddie Mercury.
Right. Just making sure I'm on track.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Direct communication. I mean, it's at least implied that's who he's talking to. Somebody was passing his instructions. Yeah, Crowley does wear sunglasses and as if for real. At night. At night. It was quite a nice hospital, thought Mr. Young. It would have been quiet too, if it wasn't for the nuns. He quite liked nuns. Not that he was a, left-footer or anything like that. No, when it came to avoiding going to church, the church he stolidly avoided going to was... Saint Cecil, and all angels, no nonsense, C of E, and he wouldn't have dreamed of avoiding going to any other. All the others had the wrong smell, floor polish for the low, somewhat suspicious incense for the high, Deep in the leather armchair of his soul, Mr. Young knew that God got embarrassed at that sort of thing. But he liked seeing nuns around, in the same way that he liked seeing the Salvation Army. It made you feel that it was all right. That people somewhere were keeping the world on its axis. This was his first experience of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl, however. Big asterisks, hold on. St. Beryl Articulatus of Krakow, reported to have been martyred in the middle of the 5th century. According to legend, Beryl was a young woman who was betrothed against her will to a pagan, Prince Casimir. On their wedding night, she prayed to the Lord to intercede, vaguely expecting a miraculous beard to appear. Okay. And she had, in fact, already laid in a small ivory-handled razor, suitable for ladies against this very eventuality. Instead, the Lord granted Beryl the miraculous ability to chatter continually about whatever was on her mind, however inconsequential, without pause for breath or food. According to one version of the legend, Beryl was strangled by Prince Casimir 3 weeks after the wedding, with their marriage still unconsummated. She died a virgin and a martyr, chattering to the end. According to another version of the legend, Casimir bought himself a set of earplugs, and she died in bed with him at the age of 62. The Chattering Order of St. Beryl is under a vow to emulate St. Beryl at all times, except on Tuesday afternoons, for half an hour, when the nuns are permitted to shut up and, if they wish, to play table tennis.
Wow.
Deirdre had run across them while being involved in one of her causes, possibly the one involving lots of unpleasant South Americans fighting the other unpleasant South Americans. Terry Pratchett's words, not mine. And the priest egging them on instead of getting on with proper priestly concerns, like organizing the church, cleaning rota. The point was, nuns should be quiet. They were the right shape of it, but those pointy things you got in those chambers, Mr. Young was vaguely aware your hi-fi got tested in. They shouldn't be, well, chattering all the time. He filled his pipe with tobacco. Well, they called it tobacco. It wasn't what he thought of as tobacco. It wasn't the tobacco you used to get, and wondered reflectively what would happen if you asked a nun where the gents was. Probably the Pope sent you a sharp note or something. He shifted his position awkwardly and glanced at his watch. One thing, though, at least the nuns had put their foot down about him being present at the birth. Deirdre had been all for it. She'd been reading things again. One kid already, and suddenly she's declaring that this confinement was going to be the most joyous and sharing experience 2 humans could have had. That's what came of letting her order her own newspapers. Mr. Young distrusted papers whose inner pages had names like Lifestyle or Options. You can tell how old this book is. Well, he hadn't got anything against joyous sharing experiences. Joyous sharing experiences were fine by him. The world probably needed more joyous sharing experiences. But he had made it abundantly clear that this was one joyous sharing experience Deirdre could have by herself. And the nuns had agreed. They saw no reason for the father to be involved in the proceedings. When you thought about it, Mr. Young mused, they probably saw no reason why the father should be involved anywhere. He finished thumbing the so-called tobacco into the pipe and glared at a little sign on the wall of the waiting room that said, for his own comfort, he would not smoke. For his own comfort, he decided he'd go and stand in the porch. If there was a discreet shrubbery for his own comfort out there, so much the better. He wandered down the empty corridors and found a doorway that led out to a rain-swept courtyard full of righteous dustbins. He shivered and cupped his hands to light the pipe. It happened to them at a certain age, wives, 25 blameless years. Then suddenly they were going off and doing these robotic exercises in pink socks with feet cut out, and they started blaming you for never having to work for a living. It was hormones or something. A large black car skidded to a halt by the dustbins. A young man in dark glasses leaped out into the drizzle, holding what looked like a carry coat, and snaked towards the entrance. Mr. Young took the pipe out of his mouth. "You've left your lights on," he said helpfully. The man gave him a blank look of someone whom lights are the least of his worries, and waved a hand vaguely towards the Bentley. The lights went out. "That's handy," said Mr. Young. "Infrared, is it?" He was mildly surprised to see the man did not appear to be wet, and that the carry cot appeared to be occupied. "Has it started yet?" the man asked. Mr. Young felt vaguely proud to be so instantly recognizable as a parent. "Yes," he said. "They made me go out," he added thankfully. "Already? Any idea how long we've got?" "We," Mr. Young noted, obviously a doctor with views about co-parenting. "I think we were, getting on with it," said Mr. Young. "What room is she in?" he said hurriedly. "We're in room 3, said Mr. Young. He patted his pockets and found the battered packet in which, in accord with tradition, he had brought with him. "Would we care to share a Joy cigar experience?" he said. But the man had gone. Mr. Young carefully replaced the packet and looked reflectively at his pipe. Always in a rush, these doctors. Working all hours God sent. There's a trick they do with 1 pea and 3 cups, which is very hard to follow, and something like, for greater stakes than a handful of loose change, is about to take place. The text will be slowed down to allow the sleight of hand to be followed. I'm going to take a drink for this one. Get ready. Mrs. Deirdre Young is giving birth in delivery room 3. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby A. The wife of the American Cultural Attaché, Mrs. Harriet Dowling, is giving birth in delivery room 4. She is having a golden-haired male baby boy we will call Baby B. Sister Mary Luquasius has been a devout Satanist since birth. She went to Sabbat school. Sabbat. She went to Sabbat school as a child and won black stars in handwriting and liver. When she was told to join the Chattering Order, she went obediently, having a natural talent in that direction and, in any case, knowing that she was told to join, that she would be among friends. She would be quite bright if she was ever put in a position to find out, but long ago found that being a scatterbrain, as she'd put it, gave you an easier journey through life. Currently, she was being handed a golden-haired male baby we will call the Adversary, Destroyer of Kings, Angel of the Bottomless Pit, Great Beast that is called Dragon, Prince of this world, Father of Lies, Spawn of Satan, and Lord of Darkness. Watch carefully. Round and round they go. "Is that him?" said Sister Mary, staring at the baby. "Only I'd expect funny eyes. Red, or green, or teensy-weensy little hoofikins, or a wheedle tail. She turned him around as she spoke. No horns either. The devil's child looked ominously normal. Yes, that's him, said Crowley. Fancy me holding the Antichrist, said Sister Mary, and bathing the Antichrist, and counting his little toesy-woesies. She was now addressing the child directly, lost in some world of her own. Crowley waved a hand in front of her, Wimple. Hello, Sister Mary. Sorry, sir. He's a little sweetheart, though. Does he look like his daddy? I bet he does. Does he look like his daddy Waddykins? No, Crowley said firmly. And now I should get up to the delivery rooms if I were you. Will he remember me when he grows up, do you think? Said Sister Mary wistfully, sidling slowly down the corridor. Pray that he doesn't, said Crowley, and fled. Sister Mary headed through the nighttime hospital with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down in it. He gurgled. She gave him a tickle. A matronly head appeared around the door, and it said, Sister Mary, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on duty in room 4? Mr. Crowley said, just glide along. There's a good nun. Have you seen the husband anywhere? He's not in the waiting room. I've only seen Mr. Crowley, and he told me. I'm sure he did, said Sister Grace Voluble firmly. I suppose I'd better go and look for the wretched man. Come in and keep an eye on her, will you? She's a bit woozy, but the baby's fine. Sister Grace paused. Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eye? You know, Sister Mary hissed archly. The babies. The exchange. Of course. In good time. But we can't have the father wandering around, can we? Said Sister Grace. No telling what he might see. So just wait here and mind the baby. There's a dear. She sailed down the polished corridor. Sister Mary, wheeling her bassinet, entered the delivery room. Mrs. Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep, and with a look of determined self-satisfaction for someone who knows that other people are going to have to do the running around for once. Baby A was asleep beside her, weighed and name-tagged. Sister Mary, who had been brought up to be helpful, removed the name tag, copied it out, and attached the duplicate to the baby in her care. The babies looked similar, both being small, blotchy, and looking sort of, though not really, like Winston Churchill. Now, thought Sister Mary, I could do with a nice cup of tea. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got right down to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by new ideas, like dressing up in jackboots and shooting people, or dressing up in white sheets and lynching people, or dressing up in tie-dye jeans and playing guitars at people. Offer people a new creed with a costume, and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyway, being brought up as a Satanist tended to take the edge off of it. It was something you did on Saturday nights. And the rest of the time, you simply got on with your life as best you could, just like everyone else. Besides, Sister Mary was a nurse, and nurses, whatever their creed, are primarily nurses, which had a lot to do with wearing your watch upside down, keeping calm in emergencies, and dying for a cup of tea. She hoped someone would come soon. She'd done the important bit. Now she wanted her tea. It may help to understand human affairs to be clear that most of the great triumphs and tragedies of history are caused Not by people being fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, but by people being fundamentally people. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. Has it happened yet? Asked Mr. Young. I'm the father, the husband, whatever. Both. Sister Mary had expected the American cultural attaché to look like any American she'd ever seen on television. Oh, sorry. I lost a row there. To look like Blake Carrington or J.R. Ewing. Or Mr. Young didn't look anything like American she'd seen on TV. I don't know who these references are, so that was completely lost on me. To look like Bill Nye.
This book is.
To look like Bill Nye or Will Smith. There we go. Is that better? Totally different directions there. It didn't look like any American she'd ever seen on television, except possibly for the avuncular sheriff in the best class of murder mystery. Another asterisk, with a little old lady as the sleuth and no car chases unless they're done very slowly. Okay. He was something of a disappointment. She didn't think much of his cardigan either. She swallowed her disappointment. Oh, yes, she said. Congratulations. Your lady wife's asleep, poor pet. Mr. Young looked over her shoulder. Twins, he said. He reached for his pipe. He stopped reaching for his pipe. He reached for it again. Twins? No one said anything about twins. Oh, no, said Sister Mary hurriedly. This one's yours. The other one's, someone else's. Just looking after him till Sister Grace gets back. No, she reiterated, pointing to the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, the grace beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, lord of darkness. This one is definitely yours. From the top of his head to the tip of his woofy-woofies, which he hasn't got, she added hastily. Mr. Young peered down. Ah, yes, he said doubtfully. He looks like my side of the family. Were present and correct. Is he? Oh, yes, said Sister Mary. He's a very normal child, she added. Very, very normal. There was a pause. They stared at the sleeping baby. You don't have much of an accent, said Sister Mary. Have you been over here long? About 10 years, said Mr. Young, mildly puzzled. The job moved, you see, and I had to move with it. It must be a very exciting job. I've always thought, said Sister Mary. Mr. Young looked gratified. Not everyone appreciated the more stimulating aspects of cost accountancy. I expect it was very different where you were before, Sister Mary went on. I suppose so, Mr. Young, who'd never really thought about it. Luton, as far as he could remember, was pretty much like Tadfield. The same sort of hedges between your house and the railway station, the same sort of people. Taller buildings, for one thing, said Sister Mary desperately. Mr. Young stared at her. The only one he could think of was the Alliance in Leicester offices. And I expect you go to a lot of garden parties, said the nun. Ah, he was on firmer ground here. Deirdre was very keen on that sort of thing. Lots, he said, with feeling. Deirdre makes jam for them, you know, and I normally have to help with the white elephant. This was an aspect of Buckingham Palace society that had never occurred to Sister Mary, although the pachyderm fitted right in. I expect they're the tribute, she said. I read where these foreign potentates give her all sorts of things. I'm sorry? I'm a big fan of the royal family, you know. Oh, so am I, said Mr. Young, leaping gratefully onto the new ice floe in the bewildering stream of consciousness. Yes, you knew where you were with the royals. The proper ones, of course, who pulled their weight in the hand-waving and bridge-opening department. Not the ones who went to discos all night and were sick all over the paparazzi. It is possibly worth mentioning at this point that Mr. Young thought the paparazzi was a kind of Italian linoleum. Oh, man. That's nice, said Sister Mary. I thought you people weren't too keen on them. What with what with revolting and throwing all of those tea sets into the river? She chattered on, encouraged by the orders, instructions that members should always say what was on their minds. Mr. Young was out of his depths and too tired now to worry about it very much. The religious life probably made people a little odd. He wished Mrs. Young would wake up. Then one of the words in Sister Mary's wittering struck a hopeful chord in his mind. Would there be any possibility of me possibly being able to have a cup of tea, perhaps? He ventured. Oh my, said Mrs. Mary, her hand flying to her mouth. Whatever am I thinking? Mr. Young made no comment. I'll see to it right away. Are you sure you don't want coffee, though? There's one of those vendable machines on the next floor. Tea, please, Mr. Young said. My word, you really have gone native, haven't you? Said Sister Mary gaily, as she bustled out. Mr. Young, left alone with one sleeping wife and two sleeping babies, sagged into a chair. Yes, it must be all that getting up early and kneeling and so on. Good people, of course, but not entirely compost mentis. He'd seen a Ken Russell film once. There had been nuns in it. There didn't seem to be any of that sort of thing going on, but no smoke without fire and so on. He sighed. It was then that Baby A woke and settled down to a really good wail. Mr. Young hadn't been too quite... Mr. Young hadn't had to quiet a screaming baby for years. He'd never been much good at it to start with. He'd always respected Sir Winston Churchill. Adding small versions of him on the bottom had always seemed ungracious. Welcome to the world, he said wearily. You get used to it after a while. The baby shut its mouth and glared at him, as if he were recalcitrant general. Okay. Sister Mary chose that moment to come in with tea. Satanist or not, she also found a plate and arranged some iced biscuits on it. They were the sort you only ever got at the bottom of certain tea time assortments.
Sinister.
Sinister. No, actually, apparently not sinister, because she may be a Satanist, but she knows to bring biscuits with tea. Mr. Young was the same pink as a surgical appliance. Oh, Mr. Young's was the same pink as a surgical appliance, and had a snowman picked on it in white icing. I don't expect you normally to have these, I don't expect you normally have these, she said, losing my page. They're what you call cookies. We call them biscuits. Mr. Young had just opened his mouth to explain that yes, so did he, and so did people even in Luton, when another nun rushed in, breathless. She looked at Sister Mary, realized that Mr. Young had never seen the inside of a pentagram, and confined herself to pointing at Baby A and winking. Sister Mary A nodded and winked back. The nun wheeled the baby out. As methods of human communication go, a wink is quite versatile. You can say a lot with a wink. For example, the new nun's wink said, "Where the hell have you been? Baby B has been born. We are ready to make the switch. And here's you, in the wrong room with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of the world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, drinking tea. Do you realize I've nearly been shot? As far as she was concerned, Sister Mary's answering wink meant, here's the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of the world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. And I can't talk now because there's this outsider here. Whereas Sister Mary, on the other hand, had thought that the orderly's wink was more on the lines of, well done, Sister Mary. Switched over the babies all by herself. Now indicate to me the superfluous child, and I shall remove it, and let you get on with your tea with His Royal Excellency the American culture. And therefore her own wink had meant, there you go, dear. That's baby B. Now take him away and leave me to chat with His Excellency. I've always wanted to ask him why they have those tall buildings with all the mirrors on them. The subtleties of all this were quite lost on Mr. Young, who was extremely embarrassed at the clandestine affection, and was thinking that Mr. Russell, he knew, he was talking about, and no mistake. I don't know. Lost again, Mr. Russell. Who's Mr. Russell? Sister Mary's error might have been noticed by the other nun, had not she herself been severely rattled by the Secret Service men in Mr. Dowling's room, who kept looking at her with growing unease. This was because they had been trained to react in a certain way to people with long flowing robes and long flowing headdresses, and were currently suffering from a conflict of signals. Humans suffering from a conflict of signals aren't the best people to be holding guns, especially when they've just witnessed a natural childbirth, which definitely looked an un-American way of bringing new citizens into the world. Also, they'd heard that there were missiles in the building. Missiles. That's with an A-L, not a E-L. Mrs. Young stirred. Have you picked a name for him yet? Said Sister Mary archly. Said Mr. Young. Oh, no, not really. If it was a girl, it would have been Lucinda, after my mother. Or Germaine. That was Deirdre's choice. Wormwood's a nice name, said the nun, remembering her classics. Or Damien. Damien's very popular. Krista coming in with the raid. Hi, Spoiled Chestnut. We just reading good omens. Just in time. Ineffable husbands, yes. Good timing, I'm taking a drink. Also, there's like mild congestion at the back of my nasal passage that makes this very difficult to continue breathing while I'm reading these long passages. Oh well.
This was me when I was reading my...
Yeah. Anathema Device. Her mother, who was not a great student of religious matters, happened to read the word one day and thought it was a lovely name for a girl. Was 8.5 years old. She was reading the book under the bedclothes with a torch. And of course, the book are both in capitals, and a torch is British idiom for flashlight, so you'll have to keep up with the idioms of British subculture here.
Reading the Bible under a flashlight, got it.
Yep, reading the Bible under a flashlight. Other children learn to read on basic primers with colored pictures of apples, balls, cockroaches, and so forth. Not the Device family. Anathema had learned to read from the book. It didn't have any apples or balls in it. It did have a rather good 18th century woodcut of Agnes Nutter being burned at the stake and looking rather cheerful about it. The first word she would recognize was nice. Very few people at the age of 8 and a half know that nice also means scrupulously exact, but anathema was one of them. The second word was accurate. The first sentence she had ever read aloud was, I tell ye thief, I charge ye with my words, 4 shall ride, and 4 shall also ride, and 3 shall ride the sky as twixt, and yon shall ride on flames, and there shall be no stopping them, not fish, nor rain, nor road, neither devil nor angel, and ye shall be there also anathema. I'm reading that exactly as it's spelled, by the way. That's why the goofy voice was there. Anathema liked to read about herself. There were books which caring parents would read the right Sunday papers could purchase with their children's names printed in as the heroine or hero. This was meant to interest the child in the book. In Anathema's case, it wasn't only her in the book. It had been spot on so far, but her parents and grandparents and everyone back to the 17th century. She was too young and too self-centered at this point to attach any importance to the fact that there was no mention made of her children, or indeed any events in her future further than 11 years' time. When you're 8.5, 11 years is a lifetime, and of course, if you believed the book, it would be. She was a bright child, with a pale face and black eyes and hair. As a rule, she tended to make people feel uncomfortable, a family trait she had inherited, along with being more psychic than was good for her, from her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. She was precocious and self-possessed. The only thing about anathema her teachers ever had the nerve to upbraid for her was her spelling, which was not so appalling as 300 years too late. The nuns took baby A and swapped it with baby B under the noses of the attache's wife and the Secret Service men, by the cunning expedient of wheeling one baby away to be weighed, love. Ought to do that, it's the law, and wheeling another baby back a little later. The cultural attaché himself, Thaddeus J. Dowling, had been called back to Washington in a hurry a few days earlier, but he had been on the phone with Mrs. Dowling throughout the birth experience, helping her with her breathing. It didn't help that he had been talking on the other line to his investment counselor. At one point, he'd been forced to put her on hold for 20 minutes, but that was okay. Having a baby is the single most joyous co-experience that two human beings can share. He wasn't going to miss a second of it. He got one of the Secret Service men to videotape it for him. Evil in general does not sleep, and therefore doesn't see why anyone else should. But Crowley liked sleep. It was one of the pleasures of the world, especially after a heavy meal. He slept right through most of the 19th century, for example, not because he needed to, simply because he enjoyed it. Although he did have to get up in 1832 to go to the laboratory. One of the pleasures of the world, well, he'd better start really enjoying them now, while there was still time. The Bentley roared through the night, heading east. Of course, he was all in favor of Armageddon in general terms. If anyone had asked him why he'd been spending centuries tinkering in affairs of mankind, he'd have said, "Oh, in order to bring about Armageddon and the triumph of hell." But it was one thing to work to bring it about, and quite another for it to actually happen. Crowley had always known that he would be around when the world ended. because he was immortal and wouldn't have any alternative. But he'd hoped it would be a long way off, because he rather liked people. It was a major failing in a demon. Oh, he did his best to make their short lives miserable, because that was his job. But nothing he could think up was half as bad as the stuff they thought up themselves. They seemed to have a talent for it. It was built into their design somehow. They were born into the world that was against them in 1,000 little ways, and then devoted most of their energies to making it worse. Over the years, Crowley had found it increasingly difficult to find anything demonic to do which showed up against the natural background of generalized nastiness. There had been times, over the past millennium, when he'd felt like sending a message back below saying, "Look, we may as well give up right now. We might as well shut down Dis and Pandemonium and everywhere and move up here. There's nothing we can do to them that they don't do themselves, and they do things we've never thought of, often involving electrodes. They got what we lack. They've got imagination. And electricity, of course." One of them had written it, hadn't he? "Hell is empty, and all the devils are here." Crowley had got a commendation for the Spanish Inquisition. He had been in Spain then, mainly hanging around cantinas in the nicer parts, and hadn't even known about it until the commendation arrived. He'd gone to have a look, and had come back and got drunk for a week. That Hieronymus Bosch, what a weirdo. And just when you think they were more malignant than ever hell could be, they could occasionally show more grace than heaven ever dreamed of. Often the same individual was involved. It was this free will thing, of course. It was a bugger. Aziraphale had tried to explain it to him once. The whole point, he said. This was somewhere around 1020, when they'd first reached their little arrangement. The whole point was that when a human was good or bad, it was because they wanted to be, whereas people like Crowley and, of course, himself were set in their ways right from the start. People could become truly holy, he said, unless they also had the opportunity to be definitively wicked. Crowley had thought about this for some time, and around 1023, he had said, "Hang on, that only works, right? If you start everyone off equal, okay? You can't start someone off in a muddy shack in the middle of a war zone and expect them to do as well as someone born in a castle." Ah, Aziraphale had said that's the good bit. The lower you start, the more opportunities you have. Crowley had said, "That's lunatic." "No," said Aziraphale, "it's ineffable." Aziraphale, the enemy, of course, but an enemy for 6,000 years now, which made him sort of a friend. Crowley reached down and picked up the car phone. Being a demon, of course, was supposed to mean you had no free will, but you couldn't hang around humans for very long without learning a thing or two. Mr. Young had not been too keen on Damien or Wormwood, or any of Sister Mary Lucretius's other suggestions, which had covered half of hell and most of the golden years of Hollywood. "Well," she said finally, a little hurt, "I don't think there's anything wrong with Errol or Carrie. Very American names, both of them." "I'd fancied something more, well, traditional," explained Mr. Young. "We've always gone for good, simple names in our family." Sister Mary beamed. "That's right. The old names are always the best, if you ask me. A decent English name, like people had in the Bible," said Mr. Young. "Matthew, Mark, Luke, John," he said. Speculatively, Sister Mary winced. Only they've never struck me as very good Bible names, really, said Mr. Young added. They sounded more like cowboys or footballers. Saul's nice, said Sister Mary, making the best of it. I didn't want something too old-fashioned, said Mr. Young. Or Cain. Very modern sound. Cain, really. Sister Mary tried. Mr. Young looked doubtful. Oh, there's always Adam, said Sister Mary. That should be safe enough, she thought. Adam, said Mr. Young. It would be nice to think that the Satanist nuns had the surplus baby B, discreetly adopted. Then he grew to be a normal, happy, laughing child, active, exuberant, and after that grew to become a normal, fairly contented adult. And perhaps that's what happened. Let your mind dwell on his junior school prize for spelling, his unremarkable, although quite pleasant time at university, his job in the payroll department of the Tadfield and Norton Building Society, his lovely wife. Possibly you would like to imagine some children and a hobby, restoring vintage motorcycles perhaps, or breeding tropical fish. You don't want to know what could have happened to Baby B. We like your version better anyways. He probably wins prizes for his tropical fish. In a small house in Dorking, Surrey, a light was on in the bedroom window. Newton Pulsifer was 12 and thin, bespectacled, and he should have been in bed hours ago. His mother, though, was convinced of her child's genius and let him stay up past his bedtime to do his experiments. His current experiment was changing a plug on an ancient Bakelite radio his mother had given him to play with. He sat at what he probably called his worktop, a battered old table covered in curls of wire, batteries, little light bulbs, and a homemade crystal set that had never worked. He hadn't managed to get the backlight radio working yet, either, but then again, he never seemed able to get that far. 3 slightly crooked model airplanes hung on cotton cords from his bedroom ceiling. Even a casual observer could see that they were made by someone who was both painstaking and very careful, but also no good at making model airplanes. He was hopelessly proud of all of them, even the Spitfire, where he'd made a rather mess of the wings. He pushed his glasses back up to the bridge of his nose, squinted down at the plug, and put down the screwdriver. He had high hopes for it this time. He had followed all the instructions on plug changing on page 5 of Boy's Own Book of Practical Electronics, including 101 safe and educational things to do with electricity. He had attached the correct colored cord or coded wires to the correct pins. He checked that all was the right amperage fuse. He'd screwed it back together. So far, no problem. He plugged it into the socket, and then he switched the socket on. Every light in the house went out. Newton beamed with pride. He was getting better. Last time he had done it, he had blacked out the whole of Dorking, and a man from the electric had come over and had a word with his mum. He had a burning and totally unrequited passion for things electrical. They had a computer at school. A computer at school, the times we live in. Sorry, like that amused me more than it should have. They had a computer at school.
Just the one.
Just the one. That's how old this book is. Oh gosh. Okay. I remember when we got the first computer in elementary school too. Jesus, I'm old. In a computer at school, and half a dozen studious children stayed on after school doing things with punch cards. Oof, not that old. When the teacher in charge of the computer had finally acceded to Newton's pleas to be allowed to join them, Newton had only ever got to feed one little card into the machine. It had chewed it up and choked fatally on it. Newton was certain that the future was in computers, and when the future arrived, he'd be ready, in the forefront of new technology. The future had its own ideas on this. It was all in the book. Adam, thought Mr. Young. He tried saying it to see how it sounded. Adam. He stared down at the golden curls of the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of the world, father of lies, spawn of Satan and lord of darkness. You know, he concluded after a while, I think he actually looks like an Adam. It had been a dark and... It had not been a dark and stormy night. The dark and stormy night occurred 2 days later, about 4 hours after both Mrs. Dowling and Mrs. Young and their respective babies had left the building. It was a particularly dark and stormy night, and just after midnight, as the storm reached its height, a bolt of lightning struck the convent of the Chattering Order, setting fire to the roof of the vestry. No one was badly hurt by the fire, but it went on for some hours, doing a fair amount of damage in the process. The instigator of the fire lurked on a nearby hilltop and watched the blaze. He was tall, thin, and a Duke of Hell. It was the last thing that needed to be done before his return to the nether regions, and he had done it. He could safely leave the rest to Crowley. Pastor went home. Technically, Aziraphale was a principality, but people made jokes about that these days. On the whole, neither he nor Crowley would have chosen each other's company, but they were both men, or at least men-shaped creatures of the world, and the arrangement had worked to their advantage all this time. Besides, you grew accustomed to the only other face that had been around for more or less consistently for 6 millennia. The arrangement was very simple. So simple, in fact, that it didn't really deserve the capital letter, which it had got for simply being in existence for so long. It was the sort of simple arrangement that many isolated agents working in awkward conditions a long way from their superiors reach with their opposite number when they realize that they have more in common with their immediate opponents than their remote allies. It meant a tacit non-interference in certain of each other's activities. It made certain that while neither really won, also neither really lost, and both were able to demonstrate to their masters the great strides they were making against the cunning and well-informed adversary. It meant that Crowley had been allowed to develop Manchester, while Aziraphale had a free hand in the whole of Shropshire. Crowley took Glasgow, as had Edinburgh. Neither claimed any responsibility for Milton Keynes, but both reported at its success. Note for Americans and other aliens, Milton Keynes is a new city approximately halfway between London and Birmingham. It was built to be modern, efficient, healthy, and all in all a pleasant place to live. Many Britons find this amusing. Okay, so there we go. Explanation for one joke at least. And then, of course, it had seemed even natural that they should, as it were, hold the fort for one another whenever common sense dictated. Both were of angel stock, after all. If one was going to Hull for a quick temptation, it made sense to nip across the city and carry out a standard brief moment of divine ecstasy. It'd get done anyway, and being sensible, about it gave everyone more free time and cut down on expenses. Aziraphale felt the occasional pang of guilt about this, but centuries of association with humanity was having the same effect on him as it was on Crowley, except in the other direction. Besides, the authorities didn't seem to care much who did anything, as long as it got done. Currently, what Aziraphale was doing was standing with Crowley by the duck pond in St. James's Park, where they were feeding ducks. The ducks in St. James's Park were so used to being fed bread by secret agents meeting clandestinely that they have developed their own Pavlovian reaction. Put a St. James's duck in a laboratory cage and show it a picture of two men, one usually wearing a coat with a fur collar, the other something somber with a scarf, and it will look up expectantly. The Russian cultural attaché Blackbeard is particularly sought after by the more discerning duck, while the head of MI9's soggy hovis with marmites is relished by the connoisseurs. Aziraphale tossed crust of a scruffy-looking drake, which caught it and sank immediately. The angel turned to Crowley. "Really? My dear," he murmured. "Sorry," said Crowley. "I was forgetting myself." The duck bobbed angrily to the surface. "Of course. We knew something was going on," Aziraphale said. "But one somehow imagines this sort of thing happening in America. They go in for that sort of thing over there." "It might yet do, at that," said Crowley gloomily. He gazed thoughtfully across the park to the Bentley, and the back wheel of which was being industrially clamped. "Oh yes, the American diplomat," said the angel. "Rather showy, one feels, as if Armageddon was some sort of cinematographic show that you wish to sell in so many countries as possible." "Every country," said Crowley. "The earth and all the kingdoms thereof." Aziraphale tossed the last scrap of bread at the ducks, who went off to pester the Bulgarian naval attaché and the furtive-looking man in a Cambridge tie, and carefully disposed paper bag in the waste paper bin. Ugh, British terms. Okay, just say trash can. God. He turned and faced Crowley. "We'll win, of course," he said. "You don't want that," said the demon. "Why not, pray?" "Listen," said Crowley desperately. "How many musicians do you think your side have got, eh? First grade, I mean." Aziraphale looked taken aback. "Well, I should think," he began. "Two," Crowley said. "Elgar and Lizards. That's all. We've got the rest. Beethoven, Brahms, all the Bachs, Mozart, the lot. Can you imagine eternity with Elgar?" Aziraphale shut his eyes. "All too easy," he groaned. "That's it, then," said Crowley with a gleam of triumph. He knew Aziraphale's weak spot, all right. Yeah, he does. No more compact discs. No more Albert Hall. No more proms. No more Glyndebourne. Just celestial harmonies all day long. "Ineffable," Aziraphale murmured. "Like eggs without salts," you said. Which reminds me, no salt, no eggs, no gravlax with dill sauce, no fascinating little restaurants where they know you, no Daily Telegraph crosswords, no small antique shops, no bookshops either, no interesting old editions, no... Crowley scraped the bottom of Aziraphale's barrel of interest. Regency silver snuff boxes. "But after we win, life will be better," croaked the angel. "But it won't be as interesting. Look, you know I'm right. You'd be happy with a harp as I'd be with a pitchfork." You know we don't play harps. And we don't use pitchforks. I was being rhetorical. They stared at each other. Aziraphale spread his elegantly manicured hands. My people are more than happy for it to happen, you know. It's what it's all about, you see. That great final test. Flaming swords, the 4 horsemen, seas of blood, the whole tedious business, he shrugged. And then game over. Insert coin, said Crowley. Sometimes I find your methods of expression a little difficult to follow. I like the seas as they are. It doesn't have to happen. You don't have to test everything to destruction just to see if you made it right. Aziraphale shrugged again. That's ineffable wisdom for you, I'm afraid, the angel shuddered, and pulled his coat around him. Gray clouds were pilling over the city. Let's go somewhere warm, he said. You're asking me? Said Crowley glumly. They walked in somber silence for a while. It's not that I disagree with you, said the angel, as they plodded across the grass. It's just that I'm not allowed to disobey. You know that. Me too, said Crowley. Aziraphale gave him a sidelong glance. Oh, come now, he said. You're a demon, after all. Yeah, but my people are only in favor of disobedience in general terms. It's specific disobedience they come down on heavily, such as disobedience to themselves. You've got it. You'd be amazed, or perhaps you wouldn't be. How long do you think we've got? Crowley waved a hand at the Bentley, which unlocked its doors. The prophecies differ, said Aziraphale, sliding into the passenger seat. Certainly until the end of the century, although we may expect certain phenomena before then. Most of the prophets of the past millennia were more concerned with scansions than accuracy. Crowley pointed to the ignition key. He turned. What? You know, the angel said helpfully. And the world unto an end shall come in trumpety, trumpety, trumpety 1. Or 2, or 3, or whatever. There aren't many good rhymes for 6, so it's probably a good year to be in. And what sort of phenomenon? 2-headed calves, signs in the sky, geese flying backwards, showers of fish, that sort of thing. The presence of the Antichrist affects the natural operation of causality. Crowley put the Bentley in gear. Then he remembered something. He snapped his fingers. The wheel clamps disappeared. Let's have lunch, he said. I owe you one from... when was it? Paris. 1793, said Aziraphale. Oh yes, the Reign of Terror. Was that one of yours, or one of ours? Wasn't it yours? Can't recall. It was quite a good restaurant, though. As they drove past an astonished traffic warden, his notebook spontaneously combusted, to Crowley's amazement. I'm pretty certain I didn't mean to do that, he said. Aziraphale blushed. That was me, he said. I had always thought that your people invented them. Did you? We thought they were yours. Crowley stared at the smoke in the rearview mirror. Come on, he said. Let's do the Ritz. Crowley had not bothered to book. In his world, table reservations were things that happened to other people. Drink.
So neither of them invented traffic wardens.
Yep. That is the joke there, yeah. That is a human construction of cruelty. Aziraphale collected books. If he were totally honest with himself, he would have to have admitted that his bookshop was simply somewhere to store them. He was not unusual in this. In order to maintain his cover as a typical secondhand bookseller, he used every means short of actual physical violence to prevent customers from making a purchase. Unpleasant damp smells, glowering looks, erratic opening hours. He was incredibly good at it. He had been collecting for a long time, and like all collectors, he specialized. He had more than 60 books of predictions concerning developments in the last handful of centuries of the second millennium. He had a penchant for Wilde first editions, that's Oscar Wilde, and he had a complete set of the infamous Bibles, individually named from errors in typesetting. These Bibles included the Unrighteous Bible, so called from a printer's error which caused it to proclaim in 1 Corinthians, "Know ye not the unrighteous shall inherit the kingdom of God?" And the Wicked Bible, printed by Barker and Lucius in 1632, in which the word not was omitted from the seventh commandment, making it "Thou shalt commit adultery." There were the Discharge Bible, the Triacle Bible, the Standing Fishes Bible, the Charing Cross Bible, and the rest. Aziraphale had them all, even the very rarest, a Bible published in 1651 by the London publishing firm of Bilton and Skaggs. It had been the first of three great publishing disasters. The book was commonly known as the Burger Alley This Bible. Oh, Bugger Alley This Bible. Bugger All This Bible. Okay.
Oh.
The Bugger All. Bugger All This Bible.
Uh,
Yeah, it's written in Old English, but it's supposed to be Bugger All This. The lengthy conspirator's error, if such it may be called, occurs in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 48, verse 5. And by the border of Dan, from the east side to the west side, a portion from Aphor, and by the border of Aphor, from the east side even onto the west side, a portion of Naphtali, and by the border of Naphtali, from the east side onto the west side, a portion of Manaphi. Bugger all this for a lark. Am sick to my heart of typing Master Bilton, if no gentleman and Master Skaggs no more than a tight-fisted Southwark knobber ficket, I tell you, on a day like this, any with half an oz of sense should... Oh, half an ounce of sense. It's all written in Old English, so I'm trying to translate as I read. Should be out in the sunshine and not stuck in all the long day, in the moldy old by Our Lady workshop. Ampersand, asterisk, AE, ampersand, exclamation point, asterisk. Somebody went postal and ruined the typing.
You know, at least this book has like little explanation points for those things, or in some places. Wind Up Girl, I had to keep a dictionary by my side.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman's very good about leaving explanations to his jokes for people who are not British. Which, coincidentally, there is an asterisk here. The Bugger All This Bible was also noteworthy for having 27 verses in the third chapter of Genesis instead of the more usual 24. They followed verse 24, which in the King James Version reads, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life, and read, And the Lord spake unto the angel that guarded the eastern gate, saying, Where's the flaming sword which was given unto thee? And the angel said, I had it here only a moment ago. I must have put it down somewhere, forgot my own head next. And the Lord did not ask him again."
Was it really, though?
Well, Yeah. It appears that these verses were inserted during the proof stages, and in those days it was common practice for printers to hang proof sheets the wooden beams outside the shops for the edifications of the populace and some of the proofreading. And since the whole print run was subsequently burned anyway, no one bothered to take up the matter with the nice Mr. A. Zerafael, who ran the bookshop 2 doors along, and was always so helpful with the translations, and whose handwriting was instantly recognizable. Cough, cough. Milton and Skagg's second great publishing disaster occurred in 1653. By a stroke of rare good fortune, they had obtained one of the famed Lost Quartos, the 3 Shakespeare plays never reissued in folio edition and now totally lost to scholars and playgoers. Only their names have come down to us. This was Shakespeare's earliest play, The Comedy of Robin Hood, or The Forest of Sherwood, another asterisk. The other 2 were The Trappings of the Mouse and the Gold Diggers of 1583.
Interesting time.
Yeah. Mr. Milton had paid almost 6 guineas, I don't know what that is, for the quarto, and believed he could make nearly twice as much back on the hardcover folio alone. Then he lost it. Milton and Skagg's third great publishing disaster was never entirely comprehensible to either of them. Everywhere you looked... Oh, hey, Stephen
Never
TJ.
underestimate the greediness of Pubble 9-ishers.
Hey, Stefan!
Hi, Stefan. Long time no see. Welcome back. Been a while.
Indeed it has. We missed you.
Everywhere you looked, books of prophecies were selling like crazy. The English edition of Nostradamus' Centuries had just gone into its third printing, and 5 Nostradamuses, all claiming to be the only one genuine one, were on triumphant signing tours. And Mother Shipton's collection of prophecies was springing out of the shops. Each of the great London publishers, there were 8 of them, had at least one book of prophecy on its list. Every single one of the books was wildly inaccurate, but their air of vague and generalized omnipotence made them immensely popular. They sold in the thousands and in the tens of thousands. "It is a license to print money," said Mr. Milton to Master Skaggs, who had already had a few thoughts in the direction, and spent the last years of his life in Newgate Prison when he eventually put them into practice, printing money, that is. "The public are crying out for such rubbish. We must straightway print a book of prophecy by some hag." Manuscript arrived at their door the next morning. The author's sense of timing, as always, was exact. Although neither Mr. Bilton nor Mr. Skaggs realized the manuscript had been sent was the sole prophetic work in all of human history to consist entirely of completely correct predictions concerning the following 340-odd years, being a precise and accurate description of the events that would accumulate in Armageddon. It was on the money in every single detail. It was published by Bilton and Skaggs in September 1655, in good time for the Christmas trade. Another masterstroke of publishing genius, because Oliver Cromwell's Puritan Parliament had made Christmas illegal in 1654. It was the first book printed in England to be remandered. It didn't sell. Not even the copy in the tiny Lancashire shop with local author on a piece of cardboard next to it. The author of the book, one Agnes Nutter, was not surprised by this, but then it would have taken an awful lot to surprise Agnes Nutter. Anyway, she had not written it for the sales, or the royalties, or even for the fame. She had written it for the single gratis copy of the book that an author was entitled to. No one knows what happened to the legions of unsold copies of her book. Certainly none remain in any museums or private collections. Even Aziraphale does not possess a copy, but but would go weak at the knees at the thought of actually getting his exquisitely manicured hands on one. In fact, only one copy of Agnes Nutter's Prophecies remained in the entire world. It was on a bookshelf about 40 miles away from where Crowley and Aziraphale were enjoying a rather good lunch, and metaphorically, it had just begun to tick. And now...
because Armageddon.
Yep. Yep. And now it was 3 o'clock. The Antichrist had been on Earth for 15 hours, and one angel and one demon had been drinking solidly for 3 of them. They sat opposite of one another in the back room of Aziraphale's dingy old bookshop in Soho. Most bookshops in Soho have back rooms, and most of the back rooms are filled with rare, or at least even expensive books. But Aziraphale's books didn't have illustrations. They had old brown covers and crackling pages. Occasionally, if he had no alternative, he'd sell one. And occasionally, serious men in dark suits would come in and suggest very politely that perhaps he'd like to sell the shop itself so it could be turned into the kind of retail outlet more suited for the area. Sometimes they'd offer cash in large rolls of grubby 50-pound notes. Or sometimes, while they were talking, other men in dark glasses would wander around the shop shaking their heads and saying how inflammable paper was, and what a fire trap he had here. And Aziraphale would nod and smile, and say that he'd think about it, and then they'd go away, and they'd never come back. Just because you're an angel doesn't mean you have to be a fool. The table in front of the 2 men was covered with bottles.
Sorry, doesn't mean you have to what?
Be a fool.
Oh.
The line, and they never come back, was italicized. The table in front of the 2 of them was covered with bottles. "The point is," said Crowley, "the point is... He tried to focus on Aziraphale. "The point is," he said, and tried to think of a point. "The point I'm trying to make," he said, brightening, "is the dolphins. That's my point." "Kind of fish," said Aziraphale. No, said Crowley, shaking a finger. "Mammal. Your actual mammal. Differences." Crowley waded through the swamp of his mind and tried to remember the difference. "Differences they..." "Made out of water," volunteered Aziraphale. Crowley's brow furrowed. "Don't think so. Pretty sure that's not it. Something about they're young. Whatever." He pulled himself together. The point is their brains." Page turn. He reached for the bottle. "What about their brains?" said the angel. "Big brains. That's my point. Size of big damn brains. And then there's the whales. Brain City. Take it from me. Whole damn sea full of brains." "Kraken," said Aziraphale, staring moodily into his glass. Crowley gave him a long, cool look of someone who has just had a grinder dropped in front of his train of thought. "Great big bugger," said Aziraphale. "Sleepeth beneath the thunder of the upper deep, under loads of huge and undernumbered bloody great seaweeds, you know. Supposed to rise to the surface right at the end, when the sea boils. Yeah? Fact." "There you are, then," said Crowley, sitting back. "Whole sea bubbling. Poor old dolphins. So much seafood gumbo. No one's giving a damn. Same with gorillas. Whoops, they say. Sky going all red. Stars crashing to the ground. What they puttin' in the bananas these days. And then... they make nests, you know. Gorillas, said the angel, pouring another drink and managing to hit the glass on the third go. Nah. God's truth. It's all film. Nests. That's birds, said Crowley. Nests, insisted Aziraphale. Crowley decided not to argue the point. There you are, then, he said. All creatures great and smoke. I mean small. Great and small. A lot of them with brains. And then... Bazamam. But you're part of it, said Aziraphale. You tempt people. You're good at it. Crowley thumped his glass on the table. That's different. I don't have to say yes. That's the inevitable bit, right? Your side made it up. You've got to keep testing people. But not to destruction. All right. I don't like it any more than you, but I told you, I can't not do what I'm told. I'm an angel. I had no theaters in heaven, said Crowley, and very few films. Don't you try to tempt me, said Aziraphale wretchedly. I know you, you old serpent. You just think about it, said Crowley relentlessly. You know what eternity is? You know what eternity is. I mean, do you know what eternity is? There's this big mountain, see? Mile high. The end of the universe. And once every 1,000 years, there's this little bird. What little bird? Said Aziraphale suspiciously. Bloody ancient bird, then. Okay, every 1,000 years, this bird flies. Flies! All the way to this mountain and sharpens its beak. Hold on. You can't do that. Between here and the end of the universe, there's loads of... The angel waved a hand expansively, if a little unsteadily. Loads of bugger all, dear boy. But it gets there anyway, Crowley persevered. How? It doesn't matter. It could use a spaceship, said the angel. Crowley subsided a bit. Yeah, he said, if you like. Anyway, this bird. Only, it is the end of the universe we're talking about, said Aziraphale. So it'd have to be one of those spaceships where your descendants are the ones who get out of the other end. And you have to tell your descendants, you say, when you get in the mountain, you've got to... He hesitated. What have they got to do? Sharpen its beak on the mountain, said Crowley, and then it flies back. In this spaceship. And after 1,000 years, it goes back and does it all again, said Crowley, quickly. There was a moment of drunken silence. Seems an awful lot of effort to sharpen a beak, said Aziraphale. Listen, said Crowley urgently. The point is that when the bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right? Then... Aziraphale opened his mouth. Crowley just knew he was going to make some point about the relative hardness of birds, beaks, and granite mountains, and plunged on quickly. Listen, said Crowley urgently. The point is that when the bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right, and then... I already read that part. Then you still won't have finished watching The Sound of Music. Aziraphale froze. And you'll enjoy it, Crowley said relentlessly. You really will. Oh, my dear boy, you won't have a choice. Listen, heaven has no taste. Now, and not a single sushi restaurant. A look of pain crossed the angel's suddenly very serious face. I can't cope with this while I'm drunk, he said. I'm going to sober up. Me too. They both winced as the alcohol left their bloodstreams and sat up a bit more neatly. Aziraphale straightened his tie. I can't interfere with divine plans, he croaked. Crowley looked speculatively into his glass, and then filled it again. What about diabolical ones? Pardon? Well, it's got to be a diabolical plan, hasn't it? We're doing it. My side. Ah, but it's all part of the overall divine plan, said Aziraphale. Your side can't do anything without it being part of the inevitable divine plan, he added, with a trace of smugness. You wish. No, that's the... Aziraphale snapped his fingers irritably. The thing. What you call it in colorful idiom? The line at the bottom line. Yes, that's it. Well, if you're sure, said Crowley. No doubt about it. Crowley looked up slyly. Then you can't be certain. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can't be certain that thwarting it isn't part of the divine plan, too. I mean, you're supposed to thwart the wiles of the evil one at every turn, aren't you? Aziraphale hesitated. There is that, yes. And you see a wile, you thwart. Am I right? Broadly. Actually, I encourage humans to do the actual thwarting because of ineffability, you understand? Right. So, all you've got to do is thwart. Because if I know anything, said Crowley urgently, it's that the birth is just the start. It's the upbringing that's important. It's influences. Otherwise, the child will never learn to use his powers, he hesitated. At least, not necessarily as intended. Certainly our side won't mind me thwarting you, said Aziraphale thoughtfully. They won't mind at all. Right. It'd be a real feather in your wing, Crowley gave the angel an encouraging smile. And what will happen to the child if it doesn't get a satanic upbringing, though? Said Aziraphale. Probably nothing. It'll never know. But genetics. Don't tell me about genetics. What have they got to do with it? Said Crowley. Look at Satan, created as an angel, grows up to be the great adversary. Hey, if you're looking to go on about genetics, you might as well say the kid will grow up to be an angel. After all, his father was really big in heaven in the old days. Saying he'll grow up to be a demon just because his dad became one is like saying a mouse with its tail cut off will give birth to a tailless mice. No.
That's actually fair.
No. Upbringing is everything. Take it from me. And without unopposed satanic influences, well, at worst, hell will have to start all over again, and the Earth gets at least another 11 years. That's got to be worth something, hasn't it? Now Aziraphale was looking thoughtful again. They're saying the child isn't evil of itself, he said slowly. Potentially evil. Potentially good, too. I suppose. Just this huge, powerful, potentially awaiting to be shaped, said Crowley. He shrugged. Anyway. Why are we talking about this good and evil? They're just names for sides. We know that. I suppose it's got to be worth a try, said the angel. Crowley nodded encouragingly. Agreed, said the demon, holding out his hand. The angel shook it, cautiously. It'll certainly be more interesting than saints, he said. And it'll be for the child's own good in the long run, said Crowley. We'll be godfathers, sort of. Overseeing his religious upbringing, you might say. Aziraphale beamed. You know, I'd never thought of that, he said. Godfathers. Well, I'll be damned. It's not too bad, said Crowley, when you get used to it. Drink. We're 60 pages in. Oof.
Yeah, it's been about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. We're getting to a good part too. And see if you can pick out who this character is once I get going. She was known as Scarlet. At that time, she was selling arms, although it was beginning to lose its savor. She never stuck at one job for very long. 300 or 400 years at the outside. He didn't want to get into a rut. Her hair was true auburn, neither ginger nor brown, but a deep and burnished copper color, and it fell to her waist in tresses that men would kill for, and indeed often had. Her eyes were a startling orange. She looked 25 and always had. She had a dusty, brick red truck full of assorted weaponry and an almost unbelievable skill at getting it across any border in the world. She had been on her way to a small West African country where a minor civil war was in progress to make a delivery which would, with any luck, turn it into a major civil war. Unfortunately, the truck had broken down, far beyond even her ability to repair it. And she was very good with machinery these days. It was in the middle of the city, nominally a city. It was the size of an English country town, or, translated into American terms, a shopping mall. She was in the middle of a city at the time. The city in question was the capital of Kamboland, an African nation which had been at peace for at least 3,000 years. For about 30 years, it was Sir Humphrey Clarkson land, but since the country had absolutely no mineral wealth and no strategic importance of a banana, it was accelerated toward self-government with almost unseemingly haste. Cumberland was poor, perhaps, and undoubtedly boring, but peaceful. Its various tribes, who got along with one another quite happily, had long since beaten their swords into plowshares. A fight had broken out in the city square in 1952 between a drunken ox driver and an equally drunken ox thief. People were still talking about it. Scarlet yawned in the heat. She fanned her head. She's Chaos Discourse Destroyer. Yeah, exactly. Nailed it. Spot on, dear. I'm also going to move this over because it's in front of my lamp and I can't read chat. Where am I? They were still talking about it. Scarlet yawned in the heat. She fanned her head with her broad-brimmed hat, left the useless truck in the dusty streets, and wandered into a bar. She bought a can of beer, drained it, then grinned at the bartender. "I got a truck needs repairing," she said. "Anyone around I can talk to?" The barman grinned white and huge and expansively. He'd been impressed by the way she drank her beer. "Only Nathan, miss. But Nathan has gone back to Kawuhunda to see his father-in-law's farm." Scarlet bought another beer. "So, Miss Nathan, any idea when he'll be back?" "Perhaps next week. Perhaps 2 weeks' time, dear lady. Oh, that Nathan, he is a scamp, no?" He leaned forward. "You're traveling alone, miss?" "Yes." "Could be dangerous. Some funny people on the roads these days. Bad men, not local boys." He added quickly. Scarlet raised a perfect eyebrow. Despite the heat, he shivered. "Thanks for the warning," Scarlet purred. Her voice sounded like something that lurks in the long grass, visible only by the twitching of its ears, until something young and tender wobbles by. She tipped her hat to him and strolled outside. The hot African sun beat down on her. Her truck sat in the street with the cargo of guns and ammunition and landmines. It wasn't going anywhere. Scarlet stared at the truck. A vulture was sitting on its roof. It had traveled 300 miles with Scarlet so far. It was belching quietly. She looked around the street. A couple of women chatted on a street corner. A bored market vendor sat in front of a heap of colored gourds, fanning the flies. A few children played lazily in the dust. What the hell, she said quietly. I could do with a holiday anyways. That was Wednesday. By Friday, the city was a no-go area. Go away, Siri.
Sean?
It's not even near me. I don't know how it picked that up. By Friday, it was a no-go area. By the following Tuesday, the economy of Cumberland was shattered. 20,000 people were dead, including the barman, shot by the rebels while storming the market barricades. Almost 100,000 people were injured, and all of Scarlet's assorted weapons had fulfilled the function for which they had been created. And the vulture had died of greasy degeneration. Scarlet was already on the last train out of the country. It was time to move on, she felt. She'd been doing arms for too damn long. She wanted a change, something with openings. She quite fancied herself as a newspaper journalist. A possibility. She fanned herself with her hat and crossed her long legs in front of her. Farther down the train, a fight broke out. Scarlet grinned. People were always fighting. Over her, around her. It was rather sweet, really. Want to take a guess?
I feel like I know that.
I'll just take a stab. No wrong answers. I mean, there are, but I'm just curious what you think.
I can't remember the name of the lady that's supposed to embody like chaos.
You think she's chaos?
There was, well, it's an incarnation of the concept, but there was a name for it. And I don't remember that. Or I could also say Lilith. But I'm not picking up any cues on that. So
Well, there was a very, very obvious clue, but we'll put a pin in it because we'll continue and it might start to become clear. Sable had black hair, a trim black beard, and he had just decided to go corporate. He had drinks with his accountant. Oh, that is for showcasing my two favorite authors. I, Agnes Nutter, which tell ye this, and I charge ye with the words, 4 shall ride, and 4 shall also ride, and 3 shall ride the sky as twain, and 1 shall ride in flames, and there shall be no stopping them, not fish, nor rain, nor road, neither devil, nor angel, and ye shall be there also. Anathema. Yep, that is the non-Old English version of that, and thank you, Stefan, for the 10,000 biddies. I'm more than happy to read this. I am enjoying it thoroughly. I haven't read this in a couple years, so it's good to be back at it. I read it during the first cruise that we took. I finished it, rather. So it's been about 6 years? 7? Been about 7 years since I've read it, so it was good to get back into it. He had drinks with his accountant. How are we doing, Fanny? Oh, Franny, excuse me. Fanny is a totally different thing in the English. He asked her. 12 million copies sold so far. Can you believe that? They were doing drinks in a restaurant called Top of the Sixes, on the top of the 665th Avenue, New York. This was something that amused Sable ever so slightly. From the restaurant windows, you could see the whole of New York. At night, the rest of New York could see the huge red 666s that adorned all 4 sides of the building. Of course, it was just another street number. If you started counting, You'd be bound to get to it eventually, but you had to smile. Sable and his accountant had just come from a small, expensive, and particularly exclusive restaurant in Greenwich Village, where the cuisine was entirely nouvelle. A string bean, a pea, and a sliver of chicken breast, aesthetically arranged on a square china plate. Sable had invented it the last time he had been in Paris. His accountant had polished her meat and 2 veg off in under 50 seconds, and had spent the rest of the meal staring at the plate, the cutlery, and from time to time at her fellow diners, in a manner that suggested she was wondering what they'd taste like, which was in fact the case. It had amused Sable enormously. He toyed with his Perrier. 12 million, huh? That's pretty good. That's great. So we're going corporate. It's time to blow the big one, am I right? California, I think. I want factories, restaurants, the whole schmear. We'll keep the publishing arm, but it's time to diversify, yeah? Franny nodded. Sounds good, Sable. We'll need... She was interrupted by a skeleton. A skeleton in a Dior dress, with tanned skin stretched almost to snapping point over the delicate bones of the skull. The skeleton had long blonde hair and perfectly made-up lips. She looked like the person mothers around the world would point to, muttering, "That's what'll happen to you if you don't eat your greens." She looked like a famine relief poster with style. She was New York Top's fashion model. She was holding a book. She said, excuse me, Mr. Sable. I hope you don't mind me intruding, but your book, it changed my life. I was wondering, would you mind signing it for me?" She stared imploringly at him, with eyes deep sunken in gloriously eye-shadowed sockets. Sable nodded graciously and took the book from her. It was not surprising that she had recognized him from his dark gray eyes, for his dark gray eyes stared out from his photo on the foil embossed cover. Foodless Dieting. Slim Yourself Beautiful, the book was called. The diet book of the century. How do you spell your name? He asked. Cheryl. 2 R's, 1 Y, 1 L. You remind me of an old friend, he told her, as he wrote swiftly and carefully on the title page. There you go. Glad you liked it. Always good to meet a fan. What he had written was this. Cheryl, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the vine. Rev 6:6. Dr. Raven Sable. It's from the Bible, he told her. She closed the book reverently and backed away from the table, thanking Sable. He didn't know how much this meant to her. He had changed her life. He truly had. He had never actually earned the medical degree, he claimed, since there hadn't been any universities in those days. But Sable could see she was starving to death. He gave her a couple of months at the outside. Foodless. Handle your weight problem terminally. Franny was stabbing at her laptop computer hungrily, planning the next phase of Sable's transformation of the eating habits of the Western world. Sable had bought her the machine as a personal present. It was very, very expensive, very powerful, and ultra slim. He liked slim things. There's a European outfit we can buy into for the initial toehold, Holdings Incorporated. That'll give us the Liechtenstein tax base. Now, if we channel funds out through the Caymans into Luxembourg, and from there to Switzerland, we could pay for the factories in... But Sable was no longer listening. He was remembering the exclusive little restaurant. It had occurred to him that he had never seen so many rich people so hungry. Sable grinned. The honest, open grin that goes with a job satisfaction. perfect and pure. He was just killing time until the main event. He was just killing it in such exquisite ways. Time, and sometimes people. Is it starting to become a little more clear?
Yes. The lady is war,
Yes.
and this is famine, I
Yeah,
think.
that is correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I knew you'd get it.
Well,
You just needed more context from the others.
yeah. Who am I? Who's between famine and pale horse though?
Largely debated. You either have conquest or pestilence.
Right.
It changes depending. But I'm gonna take a drink and we'll continue.
Yeah.
The best cameo is the additional writers that get added on, but it's fine. They don't come until later. Sometimes he was called White, or Blanc, or Albus, or Chalky, or Weiss, or Snowy, or any one of 100 other names. His skin was pale, his hair a faded blonde, his eyes light gray. He was somewhere in his 20s at a casual glance, and a casual glance was all anyone ever gave him. He was entirely unrememberable. Unlike his two colleagues, he could never settle down in any one job for very long. He had all manner of interesting jobs in lots of interesting places. He had worked at the Chernobyl power plant, at Windscale, at the 3 Mile Islands, always in minor jobs that weren't very important. He had been a minor but valued member of a number of scientific research establishments. He had helped to design the petrol engine, the plastics, the pull ring can. He could turn his hands to anything. Nobody really noticed him. He was unobtrusive. His presence was cumulative. If you thought about it carefully, you could figure out he had to have been doing something, had to have been somewhere. Maybe he even spoke to you. But he was easy to forget. He was Mr. White. At this time, he was working as deckhand on an oil tanker, heading towards Tokyo. The captain was drunk in his cabin, the first mate was in the head, the second mate was in the galley. That was pretty much it for the crew. The ship was almost completely automated. There wasn't much a person could do. However, if a person just happened to press the emergency cargo release switch on the bridge, the automatic systems would take care of releasing huge quantities of black sludge into the sea, millions of tons of crude oil, with devastating effect on the birds, fish, vegetation, animals, and humans of the region. Of course, there were dozens of fail-safe interlocks and foolproof safety backups, but what the hell, there always were. Afterwards, there was a huge amount of argument as to exactly whose fault it was. In the end, it was left unresolved. The blame was appropriately equal. Neither the captain, the first mate, nor the second mate ever worked again. For some reason, nobody gave much thought to Seaman White, who was already halfway to Indonesia. Sorry. That's incredibly childish. Halfway to Indonesia on a tramp steamer, piled high with rusting metal barrels of a particularly toxic wheat killer. And there was another. He was square in... Wait, hold on. Oh, nope. It just kind of jumps into it. And there was another. He was in the square in Cambola land. And he was in the restaurants. And he was in the fish. And in the air. And in the barrels of weed killer. He was on the roads. And in the houses. And in palaces. And in hovels. There was nowhere that he was a stranger. And there was nowhere you could go to get away from him. He was doing what he did best, and what he was doing was what he was. He was not waiting. He was working.
pestilence.
Well, they just covered all 4.
Oh,
But yes, the
and death.
Mr. White is pestilence.
Okay. Well, who was death then?
And there was another.
Oh,
He's always working. He is everywhere. Harriet Dowling returned home with her baby, which, in the advice of Sister Faith Prolix, who was more persuasive than Sister Mary, and with the telephonic agreement of her husband, she had named the child Warlock. Okay.
really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Warlock. Capital W. All right, sure. Warlock. Such a nice name. Such a nice name for such a nice boy. The cultural attaché returned home a week later and pronounced the baby the spit of his side of the family. He also had his secretary advertise in the lady for a nanny. Crowley had seen Mary Poppins on television one Christmas. Indeed, behind the scenes, Crowley had had a hand in most television, although it was on the invention of the game show that he truly prided himself. He toyed with the idea of a hurricane as an effective and incredibly stylish way of disposing of the queue of nannies that would certainly form or possibly stack up in a holding pattern outside the Coastal Attaché Regent's Park residence. He contented himself with a wild cat tube strike, and when the day came, only one nanny turned up. She wore a knit tweed suit and discreet pearl earrings. Something about her might have said nanny, but it said it in an undertone of the sort employed by British butlers in a certain type of American film. It also coughed discreetly and muttered that she could well be some sort of nanny whose advertises unspecified but strangely explicit services in certain magazines. Her flat shoes crunched up the gravel drive, and a gray dog padded silently by her side, white flecks of saliva dripping from its jaw. Its eyes glinted scarlet, and it glanced from side to side hungrily. She reached the heavy wooden door, smiled to herself, a brief, satisfied flicker, and rang the bell. It donged gloomily. The door opened by a butler, as they say, of the old school. Asterisk. A night school just off of Tottenham Court Road, run by an elderly actor who had played butlers in gentlemen's films and television on the stage since the 1920s. So probably not really a butler, huh?
That gentleman's film.
Gentleman's film. I am Nanny Astoreth, she told him, and this, she continued, while the gray dog at her side eyed the butler carefully, working up perhaps where it would bury the bones, is Rover. She left the dog in the garden and passed her interview with flying colors. Mrs. Dowling led the nanny to see her new charge. She smiled unpleasantly. "What a delightful child," she said. "He'll be wanting a little tricycle soon." By one of those coincidences, another new member of staff arrived the same afternoon. He was the gardener, and, as it turned out, was amazingly good at his job. No one quite worked out why this should be the case, since he never seemed to pick up a shovel and made no effort to rid the garden of the sudden flocks of birds that filled it and settled all over him at every opportunity. He just sat in the shade while around him the resident garden bloomed and bloomed. Warlock used to come down to see him when he was old, page turn, enough to toddle, and Nanny was doing whatever it was she did in the afternoons off. "This here's Brother Slug," the gardener would tell him, "and this tiny little critter is Sister Potato Weevil. Remember, Warlock, as you walk your way through the highways and byways of life's rich and fulsome path, to love and reverence of all living things. Nanny says that living things is fit only for the ground under me heels, Mr. Francis, said little Warlock, stroking Brother Slug, and then whipping his hand contentiously on his Kermit the Frog overalls. You don't listen to that woman, Francis would say. You listen to me. At night, Nanny Asterith sang nursery rhymes to Warlock. Oh, the grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill and crushed all the nations of the world and brought them under the rule of Satan our master. And this little piggy went to Hades. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy ate raw and steaming human flesh. And this little piggy violated virgins. And this little piggy clambered over the heap of dead bodies to get to the top. I'm just gonna let that one process. Brother Francis, a gardener says that I must selflessly practice virtue and love all living things, said Warlock. You don't listen to that man, darling, the nanny would whisper as she tucked him into his little bed. You listen to me. And so it went. The arrangement worked perfectly. A no-score win. Nanny Astroth brought the child a little tricycle, but could never persuade him to ride it inside the house, and he was scared of Rover. In the background, Crowley and Aziraphale met on the tops of bushes and in art galleries and at concerts, and compared notes and smiled. When Warlock was 6, his nanny left, taking Rover with her. The gardener handed in his resignation on the same day. Neither of them left with quite the same spring in their step with which they had arrived. Warlock now found himself being educated by 2 tutors. Mr. Harrison had taught him about Attila the Hun, Vlad Dracul, and the darkness intrinsic in the human spirit, Asterix. He avoided mentioning that Attila was nice to his mother and that Vlad Dracul was meticulous about saying his prayers every day. Yeah, that's fair. He tried to teach Warlock how to make rabble-rousing political speeches to sway the hearts and minds of the multitudes. Mr. Cortez taught him about Florence Nightingale, except for the bits about syphilis, Abraham Lincoln, and the appreciation of art. He tried to teach him about free will, self-denial, and doing unto others as you would wish them to do unto you. They both read to the child extensively from the Book of Revelation. Despite their best efforts, Warlock showed a regrettable tendency to be good at maths. Neither of his tutors was entirely satisfied with his progress. When Warlock was 10, he liked baseball.
To do what now?
Sorry?
He showed a regrettable tendency to do what?
Be good at math.
Oh. Okay.
When Warlock was 10, he liked baseball. He liked plastic toys that transformed into other plastic toys, indistinguishable from the first set of plastic toys, except to the trained eye. He liked his stamp collection. He liked banana-flavored bubblegum. He liked comics and cartoons and his BMX bike. Crowley was troubled. They were in the cafeteria of the British Museum, another refuge for all weary foot soldiers of the Cold War. At the table to their left, 2 ramrod-straight Americans in suits were surreptitiously handing over a briefcase full of deniable dollars to a small, dark woman in sunglasses. At the table on their right, the deputy head of MI7 and a local KGB section officer argued over who got to keep the receipt for the tea and buns. Crowley finally said what he had not even dared to think for the last decade. If you ask me, he said to his counterpart, he's too bloody normal. Aziraphale popped another deviled egg into his mouth and washed it down with coffee. Ugh, eggs and coffee. He dabbed his lip with a paper napkin. It's my good influence, he beamed. Or rather, Credit where credit is due. That of my little team. Crowley shook his head. I'm taking that into account. Look, by now he should be trying to warp the world around him to his own desires, shaping it in his own image, that kind of stuff. Well, not actually trying. He'll do it without even thinking. Have you seen any evidence of that happening? Well, no, but by now he should be a powerhouse of raw force. Is he? Well, not as far as I've noticed, but he's too normal. Crowley drummed his fingers on the table. I don't like it. There's something wrong. I just can't put my finger on it. Aziraphale helped himself to Crowley's slice of angel food cake. Well, he's a growing boy, and of course there's been the heavenly influence in his life. Crowley sighed. I just hope he'll know how to cope with the Hellhound, that's all. Aziraphale raised an eyebrow. Hellhound? On his 11th birthday, I received a message from Hell last night. The message had come during The Golden Girls, one of Crowley's favorite television programs. Rose had taken 10 minutes to deliver what could have been quite a brief communication, and by the time non-infernal services was restored, Crowley had quite lost the thread of the plot. By sending him a hellhound to pad by his side and guard him from all harm. Biggest one they've got. Won't people remark on the sudden appearance of a huge black dog? His parents, for start. Crowley stood up suddenly, treading on the foot of a Bulgarian cultural attaché, who was talking animatedly to the keeper of Her Majesty's antiquities. Nobody's going... Oh, message? No, not to me. Okay. Nobody's going to notice anything out of the ordinary. It's reality, Angel, and young Warlock can do what he wants to that, whether he knows it or not. And when does it turn up, then, this dog? Does it have a name? I told you. On his 11th birthday, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll sort of home in on him. He's supposed to name it himself. It's very important that he names it himself. It gives its purpose. It'll be Killer, or Terror, or Stalks by Night, I expect. Are you going to be there? Asked the angel nonchalantly. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I do hope there's nothing too wrong with the child. We'll see how he reacts to the dog anyway. That should tell us something. I hope he'll send it back, or be frightened of it. If he names it, we've lost. He'll have all his powers, and Armageddon is just around the corner. I think, said Aziraphale, sipping his wine, which had just ceased to be a slightly vinegary Beaujolais, and had become a quite acceptable but rather surprised Chateau Lafite 1875. Wasn't he drinking coffee earlier? I think I'll see you there. Oof. Let's see. We're about 72 pages in, but it's moving on to a new chapter. It's about 20 minutes that we could continue for.
How you feeling?
I'm good, but I just don't want to get too far into it with us having stop time coming up soon. I think we'll be all right. So we will jump in. I'll take a drink. It was a hot, fume-filled August day in central London. Warlock's 11th birthday was very well attended. There were 20 small boys and 17 small girls. There were a lot of men with identical blonde crew cuts, dark blue suits, and shoulder holsters. There was a crew of caterers who had arrived bearing jellies, cakes, and bowls of crisps. Their processions of vans was led by a vintage Bentley. The amazing Harvey and Wanda children's parties, a speciality, had both been struck down by an unexpected tummy bug, but by a providently turn of fortune, a replacement had turned up, particularly out of the blue, a stage magician. Everyone has had has everyone has his little hobby. Oof, words. Despite Crowley's urgent advice, Aziraphale was intending to turn his good or to ugh, why am I suddenly not able to read? Aziraphale was particularly proud of his magical skills. He had attended a class in the 1870s run by John Mescaline and had spent almost a year practicing sleight of hand, palming coins, and taking rabbits out of his hats. He had felt at the time, quite good at it. The point was that, although Aziraphale was capable of doing things that could make the entire magic circle hand in their wands, he had never applied what might be called intrinsic powers to the practice of sleight of hand conjuring, which was a major drawback. He was beginning to wish he had continued practicing. Still, he mused, it was like riding a velocipede. You'd never forgot how. His magician's coat had been a little dusty, but it felt good once it was on. Even his old patter began to come back to him. The children watched him in blank, disdainful incomprehension. Behind the buffet, Crowley, in his white waiter's coat, cringed with contact embarrassment. Now then, young masters and mistresses, do you see my tapered-up old hat? What a shocking bad hat, as you young'uns do say. And see, there's nothing in it. But bless my breeches, who's this rum customer? Why, it's our furry friend Harry the Rabbit. It was in your pocket, pointed out Warlock, and the other children nodded in agreement. What did he think they were? Kids? Aziraphale remembered what Mescaline had told him about dealing with hecklers. Make a joke of it. You pudding heads? And I do mean you, Mr. Fell, the name Aziraphale had adopted at the time. Make 'em laugh, and they'll forgive you for anything. Oh, so you've ruined my hat trick, he chuckled. The children stared at him impassively. You're rubbish, said Warlock. I want cartoons anyways. He's right, you know, agreed a small girl with ponytails. You are rubbish. And probably a... I'm not gonna say that word. Little girls shouldn't be saying that word either. It's an F word. Aziraphale stared desperately at Crowley. As far as he was concerned, young Warlock was obviously infernally tainted, and the sooner the black dog turned up and they could get away from this place, the better. Now, do any of you young'uns have such a thing as a thruppenny bit about your persons? No, young master? And what's this behind your ear? I got cartoons on my birthday, announced the little girl. And I got a Transformer and a My Little Pony and a Decepticon attacker and a Thunder Tank and a... Crowley groaned. Children's parties were obviously places where any angel with an ounce of common sense should fear to tread. Piping infant voices were raised in cynical merriment as Aziraphale dropped 3 linked metal rings. Crowley looked away, and his gaze fell on a table heaped high with presents. From a tall plastic structure, 2 beady little eyes stared back at him. Crowley scrutinized them for a glint of red fire. You could never be certain when you were dealing with the bureaucrats of hell. It was obviously possible that they had sent a gerbil instead of a dog. No, it was a perfectly normal gerbil. It appeared to be living in an exciting construction of cylinders, spheres, and treadmills, such as the Spanish Inquisition would have devised if they had access to plastic molding press. He checked his watch. It had never occurred to Crowley to change its battery, which had rotted away 3 years previously, but it still kept perfect time. It was 2 minutes to 3. Aziraphale was getting more and more flustered. If any of the company here assembled possess a thing about their persons as a pocket handkerchief? No. In Victorian days, it had been unheard of for people to not carry handkerchiefs, and the trick which involved magically producing a dove who was even now pecking irritably at Aziraphale's wrist could not proceed without one. The angel tried to attract Crowley's attention and failed, and in desperation pointed to one of the security guards who shifted uneasily. You, my fine Jack Sauce, come here. Now, if you inspect your breast pocket, I think you might find a fine silk handkerchief. No, sir. I'm afraid not, sir, said the guard, staring straight ahead. Aziraphale winked desperately. No. Go on, dear boy. Take a look, please. The guard reached a hand inside of his pocket, looked surprised, and pulled out the handkerchief. Duck egg blue silk with lace edging. Aziraphale realized almost immediately that the lace had been a mistake, as it caught on the guard's holstered gun and sent it spinning across the room to land heavily in a bowl of jelly. The children applauded spasmodically. Aye, not bad, said the ponytailed girl. Warlock had already run across the room and grabbed the gun. Hands up,
Oh,
dog
God.
breath! He shouted gleefully. The security guards were in a quandary. Some of them fumbled for their own weapons. Others started edging their way toward or away from the boy. Other children started complaining that they wanted guns as well, and a few of the more forward ones started trying to tug them from the guards who had been thoughtless enough to take their weapons out. Then someone threw some jelly at Warlock. The boy squeaked and pulled the trigger of the gun. It was a Magnum .32 CIA issue, gray, mean, heavy, capable of blowing a man away at 30 paces and leaving nothing more than red mist, a ghastly mess, and a certain amount of paperwork. Aziraphale blinked. A thin stream of water squirted out the nozzle and soaked Crowley, who had been looking out the window, trying to see if there was a huge black dog in the garden. Aziraphale looked embarrassed. Then a cream cake hit him in the face. It was almost 3:05. With a gesture, Aziraphale turned the rest of the guns into water pistols as well and walked out. Crowley found him on the pavement outside, trying to extricate a rather squishy dove from the arm of his frock coat. It's late, said Aziraphale. I can see that, said Crowley. It comes of sticking it up your sleeve. He reached out and pulled the limp bird from Aziraphale's coat and breathed life back into it. The dove cooed appreciatively and flew off, a trifle warily. Not the bird, said the angel. The dog. It's late. Crowley shook his head thoughtfully. We'll see. He opened the car door, flipped on the radio. I should be so lucky, 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 lucky. I should be so lucky. Hello, Crowley. Hello? Who is this? Dagon, Lord of the Flies, Master of Madness, Underduke of the Seventh Torment. What can I do for you? The Hellhound. I'm just checking that it got off okay. Released 10 minutes ago. Why? Hasn't it arrived? Is something wrong? Oh no, nothing wrong. Everything's fine. Oops, I can see it now. Good dog. Nice dog. Everything's terrific. You're doing a great job down there, people. Well, lovely talking to you, Dagon. Catch you soon, huh? He flipped off the radio. They stared at each other. There was a loud bang from inside the house, and a window shattered. Oh dear, muttered Aziraphale, not swearing with the practiced ease of one who had spent 6,000 years not swearing, and who wasn't going to start now. I must have missed one. No dog, said Crowley. No dog, said Aziraphale. The demon sighed. Get in the car, he said. We've got to talk about this. Oh, and Aziraphale? Yes? Clean off that blasted cream cake before you get in. It was hot. Still August, or it was a hot, silent August day, far from central London. By the side of Tadfield Road, the dust weighed down the hogweed. Bees buzzed on the hedges. The air had a leftover and reheated feel. There was the sound of 1,000 metal voices shouting, "Hail!" cut off abruptly, and there was a black dog on the road. It had to be a dog. It was dog-shaped. There are some dogs which, when you meet them, remind you that, despite thousands of years of man-made evolution, every dog is still only 2 meals away from being a wolf. These dogs advanced deliberately, purposely. The wilderness made flesh. Their teeth yellow, their breath a stink, while in the distance their owners twitter, "He's an old sop, really. Just poke him if he's a nuisance." And in the green of their eyes, the red campfires of the Pleistocene gleam and flicker. This dog would make even a dog like that slink nonchalantly behind the sofa and pretend to be extremely preoccupied with its rubber bone. It was already growling, and the growl was a low, rumbling snarl of spring-coiled menace, and the sort of growl that starts in the back of one throat and ends up in someone else's. Saliva dripped from his jaws and sizzled in the tar. It took a few steps forward, sniffed the sullen air. Its ears flicked up. There were voices, a long way off. A voice. A boyish voice. But one it had been created to obey. But not help, but obey. And when that voice said, "Follow," it would follow. When it said, "Kill," it would kill. His master's voice. It leapt the hedge and padded across the field beyond. A grazing bull eyed it for a moment, weighed its chances, and then strolled hurriedly towards the opposite hedge. The voices were coming from a copse of straggly trees. The black hound slunk closer, jaws streaming. One of the other voices said, "He never will. You're always saying he will, and he never does. Catch Dad giving you a pet. An interesting pet. Anyway, it'll probably be stick insects. That's your dad's idea of interesting." The hound gave the canine equivalent of a shrug. It immediately lost interest because now the master, the center of its universe, spoke. "It'll be a dog," it said. "Ah, you don't know it's going to be a dog. No one said it's going to be a dog. How do you know it's going to be a dog if no one said? Your dad'd be complaining about the food it eats the whole time." Rivet. This third voice was rather more prim than the first two. The owner of a voice like that would be the sort of person before whom making a plastic model kit would not only separate and count all the parts before commencing, as per the instructions, but also paint the bits that needed painting first and leave them to dry properly prior to construction. All that separated this voice from chartered accountancy was a matter of time. "They don't eat privet, Winsley. You never saw a dog eatin' privet. Stick insects do, I mean. They're jolly interesting, actually. They eat each other when they're mating." There was a thoughtful pause. The hound slunk closer and realized that the voices were coming from a hole in the ground. The tree, in fact, concealed an ancient chalk quarry. Now, half overgrown with thorn trees and vines, ancient but clearly not disused, tracks crisscrossed it, smooth areas of slope indicated regular use by skateboards, and wall of skateboards and wall of deaths, or at least wall of seriously grazed knees cyclists. Old bits of dangerously frayed rope hung from some of the more accessibly greenery. Here and there, sheets of corrupted iron and old wooden boards were wedged into branches. A burnt-out, rusting Triumph Herald estate was visible, half submerged in a drift of nettles. In one corner, a tangle of wheels and corroded wire marked the site of the famous lost graveyard where the supermarket trolleys came to die. If you were a child, it was paradise. The local adults called it the pit. The hound peered through the clump of nettles and spotted 4 figures sitting in the center of the quarry on the indispensable prop to good secret dens everywhere, the common built crate. They don't? They do. Bet you they don't, said the first speaker. It had a certain timbre to it that identified it as young and female, and it was tinted with horrified fascination. They do, actually. I had 6 before we went on holiday, and I forgot to change the privet, and when I came back I had 1 big fat one. Nah, that's not stick insects, that's praying mantises. I saw on television where this big female one ate this other one, and it didn't hardly take any notice. There was another crowded pause. And what are they praying about? Said his master's voice. I know. Praying they don't have to get married, I expect. The hound managed to get one huge eye against an empty knothole in the quarry's broken down fence and squinted downward. Anyway, it's like with bikes, said the first speaker authoritatively. I thought I was going to get this bike with 7 gears and one of them razor blade saddles with purple paint and everything. They gave me this light blue one with a basket, a girl's bike. Well, you're a girl, said one of the others. That's sexism, that is. Going around giving people girly presents just 'cause they're a girl. I'm going to get a dog, said his master's voice firmly. His master had his back to him. The hound couldn't quite make out his features. Oh yeah? One of those great Rottenweilers, will ye? Said the girl, and with withering sarcasm. No. It's going to be the kind of dog that you can have fun with, said the master's voice. Not a big dog. The eye in the nettles vanished abruptly downward. But one of those dogs that's brilliantly intelligent and can go down rabbit holes and has one funny ear that always looks inside out, and a proper mongrel, too. A pedigree mongrel. Unheard by those within, there was a tiny clap of thunder on the lip of the quarry. It might have been caused by the sudden... Oh, another host. Thank you! Yes, the dog did just shrink. A tiny popping noise that followed might have been caused by one ear turning itself inside out. And I'll call him, the master's voice said. I'll call him... Yes, said the girl. What are you going to call it? The hound waited. This was the moment. The naming. This would give it its purpose, its function, its identity. Its eyes glowed a dull red, even though they were a lot closer to the ground and it dribbled into the nettles. I'll call him Dog, said his master positively. It saves a lot of trouble, a name like that. The hellhound paused. Deep in its diabolical canine brain, it knew that something was wrong. But it was nothing if not obedient, and its great sudden love of its master overcame all misgivings. Who was it to say what size it should be, anyway? It trotted down the slope to meet its destiny. Strange, though. It had always wanted to jump up at people, but now it realized that against all expectations, it wanted to wag its tail at the same time. We're at 3 hours. I think that's a good stopping point. The introduction.
Yeah.
The introduction of Dog the Hellhound.
Mm-hmm. My purpose is dog.
Yep. Your purpose is dog. You shall be loved.
I hid under your porch because I love you.
I killed the mailman and buried him in the porch. Am I a good boy? Small terrier called Dog. No, Stefan, thank you. I really appreciate you stopping by and listening in with us. And matter of fact, I thank all 8 of you who are in here listening. Thank you, Krista, Spoiled Chestnut, for sending us a raid and having you guys sit in on the story time. We'll continue doing this. This was a blast. I had fun doing it. I haven't read aloud for an audience in over a decade. So this is was a little nervous for me. So I'm glad that people enjoyed it. A lot of people in chat being talkative, especially once Stefan showed up. It's good to see you again, Stefan. I know I've already said that, but it's great having you back in our streams. But we'll be back to this next Friday. How far through did we get? We're about a fourth of the way through.
That's not bad.
Yeah, 84 pages in one day. So
yeah, I did mine in 3 sessions.
4.
So 4? Okay, so that's about right then.
We got a couple sessions to get through this, and our new broadcasting schedule isn't going to start until the start of the year. So I theoretically have the rest of this month and next month to get through it if need be. Probably won't take that long at the pace we're going. We'll probably be done with it in probably 3 or 4, or maybe 5. 3, 4, or 5 sessions. This was good, and I'm enjoying it. And it only gets better from here, hun. So if you were enjoying that, this just gets better. Because Neil Gaiman is a ridiculously comedic author. Very well versed in his lore.
I've been enjoying it. It's good. I'll if we're gonna continue this over the course of several months, I'll try drawing up a couple characters.
That could be fun.
Post them in the little back thing.
Yeah, I don't have a problem continuing this. We can definitely find other people who want to also do it too, because that would be fun.
Yeah.
Give people chances to read if they want to, because this is fun. But yeah, it is a grand story. This is one of my favorites. When they talked about turning it into a mini series, I was really excited. I haven't watched the miniseries yet, but basically the actors they picked for it were good choices to play these people too. So, thank you everyone again for watching. Is there anybody? Yeah, to read. Is there anybody on right now that we can raid? I don't know if Outro's still playing Pokemon or not. That looks like he might not be. I would say I would go play Star Wars, but I've got 30 minutes before I need to turn in. I guess we're just done. It looks like everybody's pretty much off. Welcome Party RPG is playing some D&Ds. We can raid them. I'm going to send everybody over to Welcome Party RPG. Give them some love, say hi, all of that, so forth. And we'll be back tomorrow playing Descent into Avernus.
Yeah,
the new Dungeons and Dragons adventure is going pretty well. We got our new player in, and everything seems to be working out just fine there. So we look forward to seeing you guys for that next time. Let's get this raid started, and we'll kick you all over, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Good night.
Good night.